p.m. Before we begin, council, please put away cell phones. If you have personal business during the meeting, please move for a recess. If you're participating telephonically, please mute your phone unless you are speaking. Also, when speaking, please state your name for those streaming the meeting. As a reminder to attendees, this meeting is being streamed live. The camera is in the back of the council chambers above the clock. Robert's Rules of Order is the parliamentary authority for council meetings under Wasilla Municipal Code 2.04.090. Under this authority, I respectfully request council observe the following. Kindly seek recognition before speaking, that no member speaks more than twice on the same motion without an affirmative vote on a motion to suspend the rules, that no member speaks a second time until everyone who wishes to do so has spoken once. The purpose of recognizing these rules is to ensure the right to speak is equally respected and that discussion is not dominated. Before continuing, please join me in a moment of silence to honor Wasilla Planning Commissioner Melvin Sagel, who passed away yesterday. Thank you. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Cottle. Here. Councilmember Graham.
Here.
Councilmember Crafton.
Here.
Councilmember Velock.
Here.
Councilmember Rubio.
Here.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Johnson is absent and excused. Councilmembers Cottle, Graham, Crafton, and Velock are with us in chambers. Councilmember Rubio is telephonic. And Ms. Rubio, correct me if I'm wrong, you may need to adjourn the meeting earlier. Is that correct?
You are correct.
Okay. So when you're ready to leave, just let us know. Thank you.
Okay, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And Commissioner Crafton, would you?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item of business is approval of the agenda. Before changes are discussed, are there conflicts of interest to declare? Hearing none, are there changes to the agenda?
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Graham.
thank you. Madam Mayor, I'd like to move item 8.4.2, which is AM number 2444 to new business.
Is there further changes? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as amended. We are now at special orders of the day. After the presentation of the legislative citation from Senator Wilson, the meeting will recess for a 10-minute refreshment break. Senator Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Ledford and honorable city council members. Just want to say thank you again, Mayor, for that moment of silence to honoring our planning commissioner. Legislative citation here is honoring the city for their 50th anniversary. The members of the 33rd Alaska State Legislature commemorate the 50th anniversary of the incorporation of City of Wasilla under the Title 29 of the Alaska State Statutes. We all know the City of Wasilla is named after Chief Wasilla, Dena'ina chief and shaman who died in 1907, and the city dates back to 1916 when the Alaska Engineering Commission constructed work camps at the intersection of the Alaska Railroad and Carlisle Wagon. This reminds me of an old saying that our former Mayor Cottle used to say, that all roads lead to Wasilla, even back then. It's true today as well. After the planning site of 1912, the commission auctioned off settlement lots of the newly constructed Alaska Railroad platform and continued on with the oil boom. So this was really just a road to resources, little town and shop to go through. With the construction of George Parks Highway in the early 70s, opened up opportunities for the first submarine settlement, and of course with voter approval in the 1974, March 27th, the Wasilla was incorporated into a second-class city, but that wasn't good enough. So 10 years later, in December 6, 1984, it was reclassified as a first-class city. Over those 50 years, we've seen the significant progress that the city of Wasilla has incorporated. And although the city has about 11,000 residents, it also helps over another 100,000 more that goes through this town to get things done. I tell folks, City of Palmer is a nice little Mayberry of the Valley, but if you want to get stuff done, you gotta go through the city of Wasilla. Of course, the city is one of the fastest growing areas here in Alaska is in Wasilla, and it still maintains that hometown feel. We are a small town on a big lot, and I'm proud to be a City of Wasilla resident. And of course, this wonderful charms with a growing population, booming economy, the city's future looks bright. We've always had a sort of eye for the future and where the growth could be. And just want to say again, this is a legislative citation from the 33rd Alaska State Legislatures, recognizing the 50th anniversary of the City of Wasilla and celebrates the contributions the City of Wasilla has done in over a past half century. So thank you.
Yes, perfect.
Two.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wilson, for providing the cupcakes also. So we are recessed for 10 minutes at 6:07. Meeting is reconvened. The time is 6:17. We are now at commission and agency reports. We will begin with a report from the Matanuska-Susitna Borough Library Citizens Advisory Committee.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jillian Morrissey. I'm the Community Development Director for the Mat-Su Borough. And I am not a member of the Library Citizen Advisory Committee, but my department is the one that is tasked from the Mat-Su Borough Assembly with the form and the function of the Library Citizen Advisory Committee. So what I can do is speak to you just about how the advent of I will call from this point on the LCAC, how it started and where we are, and what actions the committee has taken as to date. So I'll start there. So I'm going to put my glasses on so I can read the paper in front of me. So thank you for the time to provide the brief report tonight. I do appreciate it. Our Library Citizen Advisory Committee, I will call the LCAC for the rest of this report. The community development staff is there to support the form and function of the LCAC. There are 7 members and 2 alternates that create the committee. There is a chair and a vice chair, and all of these positions were appointed by the Mat-Su Borough Mayor. The chair for the Mat-Su Borough Library Citizen Advisory Committee is Pastor Chad Scott, and then our vice chair is Michelle Dempsey. I have a senior staff member and an assistant who is providing support for the LCAC. And the functions that we provide for the committee are email communications with meeting packets and reminders of dates. We also we ensure a quorum before the upcoming upcoming meetings via email. We also do all the communication with the borough's clerk's office to notice the public for our meetings and maintain an accurate contact list for our LCAC members. We secure the room and IT support needed for the public meeting for the LCAC. I would like to add just the borough has many commissions and boards and other committees. Not all of them are live streamed for the public. We have chosen to host the LCAC in our assembly chambers and are not only having that on the Facebook Live, so that is a live stream, but also we provide another live function through our Vimeo support, which is just a software program that allows us not only to be able to provide the live stream of the video, but an archived footage. We provide meeting minutes for the record. Our staff also provides a staff report on the library material that's being reviewed by the LCAC. We provide copies of the library materials that the LCAC chooses to review. We also provide any copies of information that support the function of the committee, for example, like the ordinance that created the LCAC. And we also just provide any other administrative function that comes to us as needed, and is usually, we organize that with the chair and the vice chair of the LCAC. The ordinance passed that created the LCAC in April of this year. The first meeting that was held at the Borough Assembly Chambers was on Monday, August 10th. The next meeting will be on Monday, I'm sorry, I might have got the 9th and the 10th mixed up. Excuse me, the first meeting was Monday, August 10th. The next meeting is Monday, September 9th. And so that's when the next LCAC meeting will be. I'm here for any questions. I don't have any, I can actually, excuse me, I need to provide an update for you on the meetings. So at our last meeting, they actually did review the book Identical, and the LCAC did provide a recommendation to, I'm the final decision maker for the Mat-Su Borough. They provided a recommendation to me. I'm currently reviewing that and will provide information to the LCAC once I've made a final decision. The next book that they will be reviewing is Red Hood, and again, that will be at the September meeting. I'm here for any questions if you have any.
Mr. Gray?
Thank you, and thank you for being here. Appreciate it. We've had a lot of issues with our libraries, so following the borough's lead and knowing what the borough is doing is important to us. So a couple of questions, actually, and I'll just give them all three to you at the same time, and then you can answer them at will there. So number one, you said you provide a staff report on items being reviewed. I mean, what does that staff report say? That they're in accordance with the law, that it appears to be outside the guidance? You know, I mean, what does that staff report include? Number two would be the minutes of the meeting. You know, one of the issues that committees often have is that the minutes aren't approved until the next meeting, and then therefore, I mean, you're 45 days down the road before you know what happened. Is there any plan to release draft minutes or anything so that the citizens who are interested and who participated in the meetings can see what the official record looks like it might be saying? And the other thing is you said at the last meeting you reviewed one book. At the next meeting you say you're also reviewing one book. Or you kind of, is that a limitation due to time, or is that a limitation due to we're only going to do one book at a time? So thank you.
Thank you for the questions, and I'm sorry, I should have been writing them down, so I'm going to try to remember each one, but I might start with the last one, and then you can help remind me of the previous questions you asked. The LCA, I might have lost microphone. Okay, at the last, the LCAC chooses how many books to read, and so they do that all on the public record. So they actually began with one book and decided to continue only reviewing one book at a time. In the ordinance, it states that the LCAC would meet quarterly, but they could meet more often if they choose to do so, and they did choose to do so. So currently they're meeting monthly. So that answers the books, I believe.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, and then as far as the meeting minutes, there is not a 45-day wait period right now because we're in that monthly meeting cycle. And like I said, we've only officially had 2 meetings at this point. But it seems like they are interested in continuing the monthly meetings at this time, but that's for them to choose how often to meet. So we will always have the meeting minutes for before the committee at the next meeting. So just about a 30-day window between the meetings. If there's a member of the public that would like to go back and look at any of the meetings, like I said, it's It's not only on Facebook, if that's how people would like to consume the meeting, but they can also go to, there was a Vimeo link that we've provided that they can go back and watch the archived meeting.
Okay.
So they can see everything that's been said on the dais.
And the last question was the staff report. What's included in the staff?
Great question. This was a new thing that we had to figure out actually, and so we took quite a bit of time to make sure that we had a staff report that was of use for the Library Citizen Advisory Committee. So one of the things that we did is we looked at the scorecard that was provided by my department, and we had the staff report reflect exactly what was part of the scorecard for the LCAC, with the exception of some of the additional questions that were really there for the Library Citizen Advisory Committee to review. But I can give you some examples. I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me, but I could also provide it very easily to the City
I'm just
Council.
curious what
Okay.
sort of guidance the committee's being given from the borough prior to their meetings.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we did is we tried to we connect everything to our library collection development policy, which is available online, and you can get there right off of the LCAC page, as a matter of fact. And so we have a criteria for how we select and also weed out library materials in our libraries. And so many of the questions that are provided on the scorecard and then also are reflected on the staff report. And some of those things are best for our staff to answer. For example, what condition is the material in? So if it's a book per se, is it in good condition? Is it in fair condition? Is it in poor condition? Those are some of the things that we look at in our criteria to weed out a book if it's past its lifespan in one of our library collections. So that's just an example of one of the questions. But some of the other things are how many books do we have? Where are those books shelved at which libraries? Because the borough has 5 libraries. And so we provide answers to those questions as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you again for being here. Appreciate the report on how they're doing. You said the ultimate decision is yours at the end. Basically, the committee's making a recommendation to you.
Correct. In the ordinance, it says the LCAC is an advisory board, and the ordinance spells out the community development director is the final decision.
Okay. And have you determined the process of what happens after you make the decision if you choose that the book needs to be removed, or that's the following the recommendation? Is there kind of a process lined out about how that's going to be? And then I know there's been a little bit of controversy around, hey, is this limiting free speech by removing this book? Have you guys figured out how that's going to be handled as well in that aspect?
Those are really big questions. And I'll start with that. Right now, this is the first book that we have a recommendation from the LCAC. So we're looking at that right now. We have borough attorneys on staff at our office, and so they are part of the support team that is helping me with the review as we look at those recommendations and move forward. But at this point, we are building the bike as we ride it because we have not done this before. So this is very much a new process to us. And so there's quite a bit of just making sure that we're paying attention to what else has been happening in the state of Alaska, here also in the Mat-Su Borough. As people know, the Mat-Su Borough School District is going through, there was legal action, and so we are carefully watching that as well.
Thank you.
No other questions? Thank you.
Absolutely. Please reach out to any of my staff if you have any further questions, and we can provide additional documentation.
We'll now hear from Director Shaw on the Airport Advisory Commission.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On August 15th, last week, we had the August Airport Advisory Commission meeting. The 2 topics we talked about were the latest drawings for the airport master plan, and so we would really like public comments on those. You can find those on the airport master plan project website just by searching Wasilla Airport Master Plan, and you'll see one of the 2 links will either be the city website, which will link it to you, and the second one is the special website that we made for that. And there's a button called preliminary layouts. You'll see 4 drawings that talk about what the airport looks like now, and then a drawing that shows the near-term plan, and then 2 drawings that show long-term 10 to 20-year horizon. We'd like to have those comments back by September 15th, and you can submit those right on the website, or you can send them to me or email Public Works at City of Wasilla. The other thing we talked about was the Airport Advisory Commission's desire still to increase rates to overcome some budgetary shortfalls. And so the discussion revolved around the council's workload right now with Title 16, not wanting to overload you. But their goal is to refresh those numbers, look at some of the other airports that have updated their rates since we talked about it last, and incorporate a couple more planning tools, and then bring a suggestion to the council in the future so that we can make some financial progress. There were really no public comments, but one neighbor did come in and talk about how they set up the float plane landing, I forget the term, but basically registering the float plane landing direction for Jacobson Lake. So that was nice to know. So I'm putting them in contact with our consultants so we can just identify how Jacobson Lake interacts with our airport correctly. But that was the meeting.
Okay. Any questions? Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Eric. So, you know, at the end of the legislative session, you know, Willow came forward and said, hey, we want a 10,000-foot airport in Willow. Is the planning commission gonna come forward with something saying we need 1 regional airport, not 2, not, I mean, is there gonna be something other than the council and the administration saying that that's a bad idea?
I'm confused by your question. Are you asking if we're taking anything to the planning commission right now?
Yeah, I'm asking, is the Airport Advisory Commission gonna ask the planning commission and ask the city council to take a position on the expansion of the Willow Airport?
The Airport Advisory Commission has not taken that up as a recommendation. I believe the projects have had the visibility with the council. If that's something that the council would like to see a support resolution from the advisory commission, we can do that. You said 10,000, and I just want to correct that the working number we're on is 6,000 for runway length.
I was talking about Willow's recommendation.
Oh,
Willow wants a 10,000-foot airstrip.
correct. We have not talked about that in any official capacity.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. Now we are on to the planning commissioner. We'll hear from Deputy Administrator Nygaard on the planning commission.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As you recall, I was not at this meeting. I was in Kodiak at the AML. However, Zoe Eisenberg from BHC was able to facilitate that conversation. And they had quite a bit of conversation around ordinance 2425 and 2423 as requested by the council. And those minutes were completed and put forward, I think, to necessary bodies to review. And they also went through the Title 16 revisions, sharing the comments that you all had discussed the night before, and we shared that, and then they gave additional comments. And so, kind of short but sweet report from the Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we are to, Madam Clerk, please read ordinance serial number 24-27 by title.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's accepting and appropriating a community grant from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in the amount of $5,680,000 for wastewater treatment plant sludge management projects.
The public hearing on ordinance serial number 24-27 is now open. Anyone wishing to testify, please come forward and begin by stating your first and last name. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Seeing no one, the public hearing is closed. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance serial number 24-27?
Madam Mayor, I move ordinance serial number 2427.
Is there a second?
Madam Mayor, I second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Crafton and seconded by Councilmember Cottle to adopt ordinance serial number 24-27. Is there discussion?
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question probably here for Eric. Was just curious to see if I know during the infrastructure tour that I took with our deputy administrator and your deputy public works director, there was some discussion around a few different things that were just kind of at a thought level down at the wastewater plant. Is there something that you guys are targeting this money for so far, or have some things in mind for it?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So first step is officially receiving this. So tonight's approval is very important. We have also put out an RFP for designers to help us with the projects. The 3 projects that were submitted on that this money is funding are management of our sludge. So the purchase and procurement of a dredge that floats in the lagoons and dredges the sludge that's accumulated from the bottom while they're still in operation. It's drastically less impactful to the operations if we can do that. We've never had that option before, so that'll be very, very handy. The next one is to improve our our sludge drying process. So when it comes out, it needs to have the water removed from it. And so there are some identified projects for a system that works year-round, not just a seasonal sludge drying bed. And then the last one are upgrades so that we can manage more sludge. So all of the money revolves around sludge, and it's just 3 different phases within the handling that we do out at the facility. And that consultant has been asked to even look outside of that and say, what else do we need in our sludge system that makes us more efficient and cost effective?
Thank you, Eric. I like hearing what you're saying. It was all things that I remember I discussed with our deputy administrator and Bob at the time as well. I'm always cautious about grants, but I think this is a really good one that we should be looking at. So, thank you.
Okay. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion is adopted. We are now at persons to be heard, a time for members of the public to share their views with the council. This is not a question and answer period or a time for dialogue. Speakers may be referred to administration, or issues raised may be taken under advisement by the council or administration. Additionally, over the last year, the City of Wasilla has routinely had members of the public attend and read excerpts from novels, some of which involve sexual content and/or description of incest or domestic violence that are not intended for children under the age of 14 and/or may be triggering to listeners and viewers. For those of you with young children viewing or listening to this meeting, or who may be triggered by the descriptions of incest or domestic violence, please be aware we are now entering public comment, and you may want to mute the video or temporarily exit the meeting. We will notify the public when public comment has ended, and council is moving on to the next item on the agenda. For those of you participating in public comment tonight, I respectfully ask you to remember that our attendees, viewers, and listeners may be under the age of 14, are victims of domestic violence, and are not choosing to read the passages that you are choosing to read to them. And
Madam Mayor, can I leave the meeting?
Exiting the meeting. Yep.
yes, Elena.
Thank you.
The
Alina has left.
The first one is David Wilson.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council folks. This is David Wilson, Senator for District N, and I am a city resident here in the city. Just want to say thanks for everyone in the public that participated in the election last week. And I know we had low voter turnout, just lack of communication, and I always was having a conversation with the clerk, and I think you guys did a fine job of getting the messages out through the mayor's radio minute and postcards you guys send out. So please continue that, because I know what that means, to try to have a voter turnout for ballot initiative situations for your city. And other than that, I just want to say thanks again for helping celebrate your 50th anniversary. Let me, our office, take part of that. And did want to apologize because I forgot to mention that our House member, our Speaker of the House, Kathy Tilton, also wishes that she could have been here, but she had a prior engagement elsewhere, as she was also a co-sponsor, and same as for Rep. Sumner. He was also tied up on other family business and cannot attend this evening, so I just want to put those apologies out there on my part for not mentioning their participation in that citation. Other than that, our office is open for communications to help folks navigate systems of government issues that they may be having and facing, and remind folks that we have 4 bill signings out here in Wasilla at Capstone, I think at 11 o'clock, 11:30. We'll find out here. And I also want to thank Ms. Johnson from our office also for coming and attending when I can't make it, and being available for folks here as well. But that will be at Capstone on the Wasilla campus. I believe that's at 11:30. But we'll find out. I'll let you guys know. Thank you again. Thank you again.
Thank you. Next up is Tom Stearns. You've got 3 minutes, Mr. Stearns.
My name is Tom Stearns. I'm the Senior Ambassador for the Wasilla Area Seniors Incorporated. What's happening at WASI? We're going to be closed the 2nd of September. It's Labor Day. And so we'll be closed that day. But then, and here's something that's really important. In September, on the 25th, it's a Wednesday at 11:30, we're going to have a fall prevention workshop. Now, that may not seem too important to you, but I was at the senior circle on Friday, and I shared that with them, and I got a call this morning from somebody that was there, and they had fallen and hurt themselves extensively. And so falls are really, really important, and if we can prevent them, that's a major thing. I've been at WASI now for over 10 years, and I've seen many of my friends die, not from old age, but from falls. And so that's really crucial. Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. The other really important thing is our membership meeting. That will be on Tuesday, October 15th, in our dining facility. And that's crucial because that is when we vote for our new board members. And, oh, by the way, if you're interested in being a board member for WASI, we would sure like you to put in an application, and let's see if you can get voted in on October 15th. We would really like to have some new faces there. We also are having a craft fair, the first on November, I believe, 2nd, at WASI. It's our annual craft fair. It's a great time to buy all the things that you need for Christmas with local vendors. And then we have, of course, our healthy aging programs, and Aspen House is on schedule to be opened up this year, this fall. And so if you're interested in that, you might want to get on the wait list. And then last, we invite all of you to come and visit us, have a meal, walk the grounds while you still can before the snow comes, and we appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stearns. Next on the list is Jackie Goforth. You have 3 minutes. Please begin by stating your first and last name.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council. My name is Jackie Goforth. I'm handing you a copy of the article from the Anchorage Daily News. It was written by Amy Bouchetz, and it was reprinted by permission of her paper, Mat News Sentinel. Matsu Sentinel. Okay, what this is what happened during the LCAC meeting. And as I have it highlighted for you right now, the committee voted 5-2 to recommend that identical book be removed from circulation. 2 members voted to remove it from young adult to the adult section. 1 member said she chose both remove the book and the option, and the other option she wanted was the book burned. The board also unanimously agreed that the book contains indecent material as defined by Alaska state law because it depicts certain sexual acts and it appeals to the prurient interest in sex of persons under 16 years of age. On the next page you see, if this book, the attorney said, if this book violated Alaska law to the point where it was so clear. I don't have an explanation to why somebody hasn't been charged, arrested, and convicted, and I will explain that right now. Before I do that, though, I want you to know that the board is made up of 7 members that were there. There were 7 members. One of those was a retired librarian who has 35 years of librarian service. She's also a member of a nonprofit Friends of the Library group. And I'm pretty sure she's probably an ALA member. That librarian voted that it was prurient interest. She voted that it had sex in it. And she voted to move it to adult. Not one person said to keep it in young adult. It is a huge difference from the January meeting where you had 4 people who were librarians and librarian board members and nonprofits all saying it needs to stay in young adult because it's it needs to be there because it's useful to them. That librarian on that board also voted that it was indecent and that it needed to be moved to adult. What was the difference? The difference is people are starting to find out what's between the covers that is being given to people's children without the parents' knowledge. That's the difference. Now, the reason why it hasn't been charged is because 43 states have given educators and librarians something called obscenity exemption statute. It's called OES. They can't charge anyone for obscenity. Only 7 states can. They are Alaska, Arizona, Colorado, Missouri, Oklahoma, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. The second reason is they have to show intent to distribute. Now, the fact it's on a library shelf is intent, but they also have to prove that the person distributing knew what was inside those covers. And right now, I can prove that everyone should know what's between the covers of identical. And I'll make sure and send this to every librarian and educator so they know what's between identical, and if it is distributed to somebody under 16, the chances of being charged will be very high. Now, the next book is Red Hood. That is September 9th, and I will be there at that meeting too. Now, thank you.
Okay, next up is Jeannie Trzynski. You have 3 minutes. Please start your testimony by your first and last name.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Jeannie Trzynski. I'm president of the Friends of Wasilla Library, and I live in the greater Wasilla area outside of the city limits. We just wrapped up the summer reading program. We had 770 participants who completed the reading challenge and were eligible to enter our different prize drawings. And we're really happy to again be able to present 6 readers' books from the Burt Cottle Memorial Grand Prize Summer Reading Program. Our story walk right now is Mel Fell, which is a really adorable story about a kingfisher who falls out of a tree and some friends watch him learn how to swim and get back to flying. Our next book is going to be Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus, which is no coincidence to the bus driving problems, although we might want to let the pigeon drive the bus, I don't know. Anyway, it's a really great story, and that'll go in there this weekend. October 24th, we're going to have our next Music in the Library presentation. Aspen Yarrow is again going to perform, but she's going to be in this presentation with her group Solar Gain. And also on that day, Aspen Yarrow's single is going to be released. Aspen Yarrow is also known as Katie Heller. She's a very incredibly talented young woman from Palmer. It's amazing the talent that we have in the Valley. That performance will be at 7 p.m. and there will be a pre-reception from 6 to 7. We had 150 people attend last time and 45 of them were children, so we think that they'll really enjoy this performance. or everybody, it was all ages that were there. On October 9th, we're gonna have our first Art for Seniors in the library. We're working with a national organization called Lifetime Arts, and we've been working with them for about 6 months to prepare for this. We did a survey that I handed out to you earlier this summer, and based on those surveys, the first 8-week course that we're going to offer free to seniors is going to be collage. It's going to be presented by Vanessa Powell. Vanessa is a retired teacher. She just retired this last year, but she taught for many years in the district. She first taught in literature and just a very talented teacher. In the last 8 years, she taught art, and she was actually recognized as the Alaska Art Educator of the Year. So we're super excited about this program, and I'll have some more details for you as we get closer to that. October 8th, we're going to have our tea with Tricia Brown. She is an author from Fairbanks, and her most recent book is The Queen of Fairbanks, about a woman who was really involved in early Fairbanks history. And so I'll come back. I'll be like the Terminator. I'll be back for the rest.
Okay, next up is Mary Robinson.
Good evening, Mayor Ledford, City Council, staff. My name is Mary Robinson. I am a City of Wasilla resident, and I represent myself. First, I want to say it's one of these double-edged situations. I saw that the trees have been cut down on Cruzy. Thank you, because they were impeding sightline trying to exit into traffic, but still I hated to see them go. And also, thank you for putting the mulch and making the library look so very nice. It's very pretty. So, some similarities between the Mat-Su Borough School District libraries, Mat-Su Borough Libraries, City of Wasilla, and City of Palmer libraries. They all had well-crafted library collection development policies, trained librarians and staff, established material challenge procedures, established reconsideration procedures, and parental consent for under an 18 library card, where the parents agreed that whatever their children checked out, they were fine with. So some of the similarities of the lawsuits that have been brought against the Mat-Su Borough School District and School Board, and will no doubt be brought against the Mat-Su Borough LCAC, and if the City of Wasilla chooses to move forward on this misguided and ill-advised LCAC. In no particular order: violation of open meeting acts, discriminatory comments connecting LGBTQ+ individuals and books, collusion between government officials, committee members, and book challengers, viewpoint discrimination, agreement with defamatory statements and threats by book challengers, elevating religious beliefs over individual freedoms, and ignoring Alaska Constitution exceedingly strong right to privacy. And what do they all have in common? Every time I pull a thread, every time I talk to someone at a meeting and say, oh, so what convinced you to testify tonight and say that there were obscene books? And they would identify themselves as King's Chapel or Apostolic Worship Center. And I find that a very odd coincidence. So just to clarify, there are no obscene books in the library. Librarians and staff are not groomers and pedophiles. And it's just very odd to me that religion keeps poking up its head for these book challenges. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Next up is Karen Lewis, and Karen, you have 3 minutes, and begin by stating your first, last name, and if you're a city resident.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council. My name is Karen Lewis, and those books are obscene. We've read them to you. You've heard it. Federal law talks about obscenity. It's very clear on what is obscene, and those books are obscene. State law is very clear too about, they specifically write out things and what is indecent. They use the word indecent instead of obscene, and these things are indecent. In Amy's article, very good article, Amy, it said that the board also unanimously agreed that the book contains indecent material as defined by state law. So, in other words, those books, those indecent books in the library are illegal to have there. I mean, it's obvious. That's an obvious point. And I would hate to see lawsuits because that's just going to be expensive. It would be smarter to remove the illegal material. Much smarter. Because you can bet it's coming. You can just bet that there's going to be lawsuits if something isn't done about this. And I appreciate you all talking, bringing in the latest library committee, who did a very good job, by the way. Even the liberal people on the board said it was indecent. So that shows you how bad this book is. It's an identical book. Now, the attorney at the borough said that Mr. Spiropoulos told the committee that his office does not consider the book illegal under state law because placing a book with indecent material on shelves is not identified as a crime under the statute. But the thing is, instead, it's how the book is distributed that matters, he said. The thing is, in the Attorney General's letter that he sent last November, it said, distribution of indecent materials to minors includes that the defendant intentionally distributed or possessed with the intent to distribute the material, okay? That means if they're on the shelves, of course their intention is to distribute it. So the attorney is wrong on that. And we need to get that illegal stuff out of the library. Thank you.
And public persons to be heard is closed. We are now at the consent agenda. Madam Clerk, please read the titles of the items for approval under the consent agenda by title.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have the regular meeting minutes, August 12th, 2024. We have two introductions. Recommended public hearing date, September 9, 2024. The first is ordinance serial number 2429, accepting a planning block grant from the Matanuska-Susitna Borough in the amount of $100,000 and appropriating funds to the fiscal year 2025 budget for the comprehensive plan development. Ordinance serial number 2430, amending the fiscal year 2025 budget by appropriating $14,285 from the general fund balance to the park shop maintenance fund and the road shop maintenance fund for janitorial services. No resolutions. We have one AM left on the consent agenda. That's AM number 2443, contract award to Northern Gravel and Trucking LLC in the amount of $32,550 for the purchase of winter 2024 road salt.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
Madam Mayor, I move the consent agenda as read.
Is there a second?
Madam Mayor, I second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Crafton and seconded by Councilmember Velock to approve the consent agenda as read. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Are we going to? Okay, is there objection to us moving AM number 24-44 that was moved to new business before we do unfinished business? So, hearing no objections, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. That's AM number 2444, contract award to NeoGov in the amount of $37,950.58 to renew the city's current HR modules and approve the purchase of 3 additional modules, which are Perform, Learn, and eForms.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve AM number 24-44?
Madam Mayor, I move AM 2444.
Is there a second?
Madam Mayor, I second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Graham and seconded by Councilmember Velock to approve AM number 24-44. Is there discussion?
Madam
Mr.
Mayor.
Graham?
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm with our HR director. I know we currently have 2 modules, I think, of NeoGov, and then we're adding some more modules. Is this going to be a fairly seamless transition to get to this point, or is it going to, is it going to take 60 days to move through all this and get staff trained? I know your staff is kind of limited, but everything your staff does affects everybody in the city, so I just want to make sure we're not going to drive into a mud puddle here and take some time to come out. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So we do currently have 2 modules of NeoGov. We have Insight, which handles our recruitment, as well as Onboard, which is supposed to be the half that processes individuals after we hire. We just finished building that Onboard, and that took about 45 days. With regards to the new modules, I've already done an installation of Perform at my previous position, and that took about 3 months. Since we already have a jump on it with my experience, I imagine and I anticipate that both Onboard, e-forms and Perform will be done by January 1. The third module is a learning module, an LMS system. That's going to be pretty just cut and dry as far as assigning the trainings, which is something that we do at the beginning of every calendar year. So that'll be a relatively quick process, maybe 2 weeks.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear you have experience with this and you're ready to tackle this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there further discussion?
Madam Mayor? Yeah, just a question. Does this include online time cards for the city? I know they're doing paper right now.
Yeah. It does not. They do have a module that will allow for online time entry, but at this point, we're holding off moving with that until we determine which ERP we're going with the city, if council approves a transition. And if that does not have an online payroll, then we can add that module as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Further discussion? Hearing none. Thank you, Kim. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion's approved. So we are back to unfinished business. Madam Clerk, please read the title of ordinance and IM.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's ordinance serial number 2425 amended, which is amending Wasilla Municipal Code Chapter 260 Planning Commission to update and clarify the duties and authority of the Planning Commission, authorize compensation for regular and special meetings attended, and codify the meeting and scheduling procedures by the Commission. This was referred to the Planning Commission on July 22nd for 30 days. Accompanying that is IM number 2410, comments, concerns, and recommendations from the Planning Commission on ordinance serial number 2425 amended.
Okay, council, what action do you wish to take on this ordinance? Mr. Graham?
Madam Mayor, I would like to follow the recommendation of the Planning Commission and postpone this ordinance for the first meeting following 60 days from now. Their recommendation was to postpone for 60 days.
Okay. Any further action?
Second.
Is there a second to?
Referral.
To the postponement or referral?
Yeah.
Madam Mayor,
Go.
I second postponement. No, I don't.
You second the referral. So
I
we're going
second
to
the
refer it
referral.
for 60 days.
For 60 days.
Okay. Is there objection to the referral?
Madam Mayor, I object.
Okay.
Discussion or take a vote?
Mr. Crafton?
just speaking to my objection here, I think the planning commission had some time to look at this one here. I mean, again, this comes back to, this is a council authority at this point here. And looking at some of their comments that they've already made here, their comments actually didn't even address any of the changes that were brought forward. Some of the comments they made were things, again, I didn't bring up in the change to this ordinance here. I think it would be best that the council handles this instead of trying to refer this back down to the planning commission, since based on what they've brought back to us, to me, I don't see any substantial changes or anything that they've done in the time that they have had it.
Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm gonna have to disagree with you here a little bit, Ian. The planning commission meets once a month. So basically, they've had one chance to look at this. They get their agendas slightly before their meeting, just like we do. So saying that they've had 30 days, we gave the council 30 days to come up with a plan, and their plan was, we need more time to look at it, and I think that's fine, and I think they're the experts on how the planning commission runs. So if they think they need, more than a couple days to look at it, I don't have a problem with that, and I think we should certainly defer wherever there's good reason to our commissions and agencies. Thank you.
Okay, further discussion? Madam Clerk, roll call vote.
Roll call vote on the referral, 90 days to Planning Commission. Councilmember Cottle.
Yes.
Councilmember Graham.
Yes.
Councilmember Crafton.
No.
Councilmember Velock.
Yes.
Madam Mayor, the referral fails with council members Cottle, Graham, and Velock in support, Crafton opposed.
Okay. Now what do we do?
So the ordinance is before. Can I have just a minute?
Yes.
Just a brief at ease.
We'll have an at ease.
Mayor, do you want to turn your mic off? Press her mic.
Oh, I'm sorry, 60 days, pardon me, that was the motion. Do you want to, I messed that up, so it's actually the referral was 60 days, is that going to change your mind, Councilmember Crafton?
I mean, if they wanted it for another 30 days, I mean, they have the option
So
to meet
let's
twice a month.
go back to the referral, 60 days. Can we redo that vote on 60 days? I apologize. Completely my error there. Councilmember Cottle, 60-day referral.
Yes.
Councilmember Graham.
Yes.
Councilmember Crafton.
No.
Councilmember Velock.
Yes.
Madam Mayor, that fails with Councilmembers Cottle, Graham, Velock in support, Crafton opposed. So the 60-day fails. So the motion before the council, I just double-checked the meeting minutes on the referral. The motion to adopt was pending. So that's the motion before the body. Does that make sense?
We go back to the original motion.
Is there discussion?
Is there discussion on, sorry,
On the
is there discussion on the original motion? Mr. Graham?
Thank you. You know, I'm gonna have to vote against this, because I just don't think we have, the input, essentially on a rewrite, of the responsibilities of the commission. I just don't think we have the, input that we need, from the experts, which are, you know, the people with their boots on the ground, which is the planning commission, to go ahead and, go forward with this. I would certainly support, bringing it back. But I don't know, I'd have to hear some sort of compelling argument to vote in favor of it. Thank you.
Further discussion?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Graham, I guess to respond to that would be, a lot of this was brought about when I was on the planning commission. So I mean, when we as you mentioned boots on the ground, I mean, I spent some time on the planning commission. I think Ms. Velock spent some time. I think you're the only one here that hasn't spent time on the planning commission that's sitting on the council at this time. What I observed when I was there, and looking at this, it's not quite the substantial rewrite that I feel like you might think it is. A lot of this is just a clarification around how they operate when it comes to their meetings. What I observed and witnessed in my time on the planning commission was meetings being canceled for members to go moose hunting, when the previous meeting was the members stating that we had plenty of business to do and that we should be having meetings twice a month, but yet they're only meeting once a month when, as you stated, they only meet once a month. If this was so important, I mean, put 2 meetings on the calendar and take the time to discuss this type of material. Because from what I'm seeing, what they want is to actually reduce the duties that they have. They're wanting to take a must, which is currently in their code. It's a shall, the commission shall, and then it lists out their duties, and they want to change it to may. So they don't want to have to do those things. So I think all this is doing is clarifying what the commission is supposed to do and how they operate when it comes to their meetings, because there really wasn't a lot of structure that I noticed during my time on the planning commission. There was a lot of I don't knows at that time. And so what I was hoping to do was to create this structure so that when we brought on a new planner, that's there, and we're having a planner that knows how to operate with the planning commission instead of having to change what or how the commission operates after we've brought on a planner at that time.
Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Ian. I fully understand where you're coming from. I just don't really agree with that at this point. So I'm gonna bring up something political here. It takes 4 votes to pass this. I'm not gonna vote for it to pass it. However, I would be willing to postpone it for 60 days, whatever meeting that is following the 60 days. And that would mean that all 4 of us would have to do that as well. So I don't want to tie us down in a bunch of bureaucratic nonsense. If you're not amenable to the 60 days, then I won't bring that motion forward. But at this point, I can tell you I cannot vote for this, which would essentially kill it, which means we'd have to restart the whole thing over again.
May I ask a question of you, Madam Mayor? What would you hope to gain out of the 60 days? Would it just be that all 6 of us are here at the time to re-vote on it and see how it goes?
I would like to have us all here at the time to re-vote on it, but I would also like to have the commissioners or commission input sitting here so that we can talk to them about that.
I'd be amended. I'd wait on that.
So, Madam Mayor, I move to postpone until time certain this ordinance for the first meeting following 60 days from today. Can the clerk weigh in on that?
So again, you're referring it, correct?
I'm postponing it. We decided against a referral. We voted that down.
But the postponement does nothing but A under Roberts, you postpone to the next regular meeting. So that's at the council level. the postponement does nothing to send it to the planning commission. That's a referral. And I know I'm not trying to be bureaucratic.
Well, that's why
Yeah.
I'm asking your opinion, I mean.
So, and unfortunately, and we can go triple check, but under Robert's Rules of Order, the same motion can't be renewed at the same session. So you've already voted down the renewal.
Right.
Now, I suppose I'm willing, if somebody wanted to make a motion to suspend the rules, if somebody on the prevailing side wanted to reconsider, we have ways to get there. So it failed. So Ian, you're on the prevailing
As I say,
side.
who
Do you
would be
want to
that?
reconsider the motion to refer? Am I making any sense?
I'll make a motion to reconsider.
Okay.
So I withdraw my motion, which was improper. Thank you.
Is there a second on the reconsideration?
I second that.
Okay, the reconsideration motion was made by Crafton and seconded by Cottle. Is there further discussion on this? Hearing none, is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion passes.
One more step, so when we reconsider, now the motion to postpone to refer for 60 days is before the body, right? We're gonna pick up right where we left off, so we have to re-vote on that motion.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for indulging me.
Is there objection to the motion to refer for 60 days? That's what the motion is. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion passes.
Thank you.
You guys thought it was fun being on the council.
Okay. We are to Madam Clerk, ordinance serial number 2426.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's amending Wasilla Municipal Code Section 204-035 to increase council member compensation for attendance at council meetings irrespective of the meeting type, and amending subsection 204-060B to remove the mayor's authority to call special meetings. And this item was postponed from August 12th, 2024. Motion to adopt is pending.
Okay. Is there discussion on there's a motion on the floor to adopt. Is there further discussion, Mr. Graham?
Madam Mayor, I move to postpone to the next regular meeting due to the fact we only have 4 council members here. This is purely a council, this talks about the council and what the council does and how it will meet. I'd prefer to have all 6 members here prior to a discussion, so I move to postpone the time certain.
Okay. Is there objection to the motion to postpone?
Second.
Oh, I'm sorry, gotta have a second.
Madam Mayor, I second.
Okay, the motion to postpone has been made by Councilmember Graham, seconded by Councilmember Velotte. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. So it's postponed till the next regular scheduled meeting. Okay, Madam Clerk, please read the next item of business by title.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Discussion, consideration, and possible action on the draft rewrite of Wasilla Municipal Code Title 16 Land Development Code that repeals and reenacts Title 16 to substantially change the uses permitted in each zoning district, the review, enforcement, and permitting procedures, the planned unit development, landscaping, parking, conditional use, and variance procedures, and the design standards imposed by the city. And this will be in committee of the whole.
Okay, is there a motion to enter the committee of the whole?
Madam Mayor, I move that we move into committee of the whole.
Is there a second?
Madam Mayor, I'll second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Cottle and seconded by Councilmember Crafton to enter the committee of the whole. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, the time is 7:19 and we are in the committee of the whole. Holly.
Thank you, Mayor. All right, so tonight we start one of the more substantial sections of Title 16. Division 3 is Downtown Overlay District. Division 4, we're going to delve into uses. So I'm going to move through this as fluidly as I can. Please do not hesitate to interrupt or interject so that we can make sure we get all of your comments, but we are going to start. I think we're going to need to move at a fairly fast clip unless we intentionally and deliberately slow ourselves down. Right, hold on. As soon as I learn how to use the clicker on. Okay. I did it. All right. All right, so this PowerPoint that I prepared for Divisions 3 and 4, I don't expect to get through the PowerPoint today, but I do want council to have it. It provides a nice outline of the issues in both Division 3 and 4, and it's very similar to the memo with some slight expansion. So it's a nice tool I hope to have on hand. The other two things that you have as laydowns are red lines of just 2 chapters. One is the density and dimension standards, and the other one is the landscaping standards. The reason why I did that is to provide a true red line, because it's a smaller, compact, it's just a chapter. We're able to really see the changes, and I think that's a little more user-friendly than working with the large red line. So Division 3 is entitled Overlay Districts. Currently, the only overlay district we're talking about is the Downtown Overlay District. It's worth noting that in the current Title 16, the Planned Unit Development section of the code is drafted as if that is an overlay district, a Planned Unit Development Overlay District. The use of an overlay district for a planned unit development is counter to best practices, and what I mean by that is a planned unit development is just that. It's a development. It's not necessarily an overlay district. It really is a plan of development that may encompass mixed use or districts, but is not a generally seen as something that another district that you adopt. So instead of adopting a district for a planned unit development, you go through a process, a planned unit development process that's very similar to a lot of other processes, like the conditional use permit, for example. So there, you'll see that shift. We're not going to talk about that too much in Division 3 and 4. We're going to delve in Division 5 when we get to the chapter on planned unit development, because there's substantial change in the procedures, and that process will now really mirror a lot of the planned unit development procedures throughout the state, which would be more developer friendly, which was one of the goals of council, because it's a more familiar process. Division 4 is entitled Use and Development Regulations. During these discussions, review of Chapter 16.70, Waste, Sewage, and Drainage Systems, will be the one chapter that I do skip over without objection from the members of council. The reason is, at the end of our Title 16 rewrite and discussion, we'll be bringing, hopefully I anticipate bringing a Title 13 revision that the Public Works Director and the Deputy Administrator and I will be working on to make sure that we really use this opportunity to get the permitting procedures surrounding wastewater management and other utilities consistent throughout the code. And so instead of delving in now, we have to work on that Title 13 piece and the 2 permits that will result from the changes. So Division 3, the basics. So one of the big things with Downtown Overlay District is we made almost no policy changes to the Downtown Overlay District. That should be done after a comprehensive plan, and it should be done in phase 2 if you're going to change the policy that underlies the Downtown Overlay District. For me, one of the most unusual things with the Downtown Overlay District is it doesn't attempt to change one factor or some similar factor, such as, say, a floodplain management overlay district, or a, what's another example, like a, sort of wetlands overlay district. You see a lot of overlay districts that are used to control and protect some aspect of the community and of the property within the communal property, I guess I would say. So what you don't see a lot, and sometimes there might be a transportation component, but to have the downtown overlay district, which in essence creates a very complex intertwined system of regulation and management and planning and zoning, is somewhat unusual. And so if we're going to do that, it's such a significant policy decision by the commission and by the council and by the and through the comp plan process that you're going to want to delve in, because you're really creating a very specific district for a very specific purpose. For that reason, we created an overlay districts division. We put downtown overlay district in that division. We changed the references to the type of permitting that occurred in the downtown overlay district to fit within the conditional use permit administrative permit model. So we are uniform with our code. We removed all of the definitions in the downtown overlay district, and there were numerous ones that were not actually words defined in the downtown overlay district section. So we had definitions that weren't used, and maybe they were used at some point before, but at this stage they're just not there. And so we really only define language we use in the code. So the other changes that we made were, we made sure that the permitting appeals and hearing procedures mirrored and were consistent and uniform when compared to those same procedures elsewhere in the code that governed the other districts. Otherwise, minimal changes to the downtown overlay district. The other purpose of this was, because this is so policy based, we wanted to make sure it was easy for council, or if the, in the comp plan process, be easy to take it as its own piece and really delve into the overlay district and possibly repeal it or revise it or do whatever council sees fit. Does anybody have any questions on Division 3?
Mr. Crafton.
Thank you, Mayor. There was a section in here, I just had a question, because again, a lot of what we were doing with this rewrite was trying to remove any interpretation. It was trying more so as very streamlined process. 16.55.015 downtown overlay design standards. I'm on page 119 of 278 because I look at the red line, very last line. I'm going to read the whole statement. When requirements in these documents conflict, the most restrictive provision as interpreted by the city planner shall govern. Where did it looks like we're adding that back in there. Is that necessary, that portion for the city planner?
So which section are you
number
in?
again?
One more time, what was it? The section number?
Page number, yeah.
Well, I'm on page 119 of 278.
What's your section number?
16.55.015.
Yeah, so I didn't change any of the language in here, but like any of the substantive language in the downtown overlay district, as far as what that, and the reason why is the language is very, it would be a large project to change the language in the downtown overlay district. And if we are not going to keep some of the provisions, then that should be done at that time. It would be most efficient. And there's nothing in here that is unlawful, but yes, it's written in a very particular way. I don't know what to, I mean, we can change it. If you would like to change that, we certainly could change it. And we could go through, we could change more of the downtown overlay district too. But I really preserve that. I didn't see that as part of the cast, I guess you can say. So, but we can talk about, if you don't want the interpretation of the planner to govern, you could just remove that section. Although I do think, as a matter of course, the interpretation of the planner will come into play when interpreting conflicts and provisions in the code. At least at that front end. And then there's that, if they want to challenge or appeal a decision that's made with the interpretation, they certainly can do that.
Okay, so you're,
So either way, but I would be fine striking you. It sounds like what you're proposing perhaps is striking the as interpreted by the city planner.
correct.
Yeah, I think that's completely acceptable. Very, very appropriate. So the version we bring back to you will have the words as interpreted by the city planner removed from section 16.55.015. And please bear with me, I'm going to summarize when we make changes like that just very clearly, because a lot of what we do is use the audio to go back and make sure we catch every change the council proposes. Are there any other notes or comments on the downtown overlay district? Does council have any comments or concerns with our approach to the downtown overlay district and just making those streamlined changes but preserving pretty much in totality the downtown overlay district language? Does that give anybody heartache? Does anybody want us to revisit that? Okay.
So just as a matter of procedure, so if there were a change to the downtown overlay district, that would come as a code change before the city council, so it would be noticed, and then there would be a public hearing prior to the vote. That same procedure would still apply, correct?
Yes, and so I think a change to the downtown overlay district is going to mirror a change to any zoning district. So we would follow that procedure as if it was any other zoning district. So if you're repealing it, the only difference to note is, let's say you decided to repeal it, pending phase 2, so you can start over. If that were to happen, what would happen is the zoning map as it stands, that blanket would be lifted. But the grandfather rights that would be triggered by the district would remain.
Yeah, this is just the only overlay district that we have, and we haven't had any changes. There have been some, exceptions, let's call them that. But I'm just making sure that, in my mind, that the public still has the same amount of input that they would have if it were not an overlay district. So.
Yes, they do. Anyone else on Division 3?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton.
There was one other spot I had a question on, well, actually two more. What page 126 in the red line again? Sorry, it's just easier for me to see it that way.
No, that's okay. Just bear with me, be patient with me, because I'll have you refer to the section. And if you give me the section, I can usually find where you're.
16.55.035. But again, it's on page 126 of 278 in our binders.
Okay.
So pre-application meeting, I feel like we talked about basically a written declining of the pre-application. I know it's May in here, so it's not required. I know there tends to be a lot of time, we're all human, we all make mistakes and miss things where somebody might not have realized that they had that option. And I want to say it was in the conditional use permit, we were discussing putting in something that just said, when you applied that, it, you know, it was very explicit that you had that option, and if you chose not to take the application meeting, pre-application meeting, that you basically signed it, like there was something that just said, hey, I choose to decline it. I'm trying to remember when we talked about that.
I think we did talk about that when we were going through the segments and making
Yeah.
sure that the application, the forms that we bring had that waiver. I think some of the other comments were we want to see that pre-application preserved. So that was one area where, and that was not something that we changed for the downtown overlay district.
I see that, yeah, it looks pretty similar to how it already existed.
But what we can do,
I was just gonna say, my comment would be making sure that mirrors whatever's in the CUP portion of it.
okay.
So if we do end up putting something in there that says, hey, we're gonna give the person a right to waive it, that it's also in this, cause it's a very similar section.
No, we can definitely make that change, and we did put language in that created that waiver option. So I'm just going to say for the record that we are going to mirror the pre-application process in the downtown overlay district and the CUP process.
Holly, does that mean that they, I forgot what that is, or I may not have been here at that meeting, so whatever my excuse is, but do they not have to have a pre-application meeting?
It allows, and I think one of the goals is sometimes you have a significant request that comes in the door, and sometimes you have a very minor request. So the waiver of a pre-application process allows someone to just come in and submit the permit and take, and what happens, happens. So the goal is to, I think that the code anticipates that most will have a pre-application process, and we did put language in there that it has the planner consent, so there's, and I'll have to, so when we talk about this with the conditional use permit, I have to say, I'm not as prepared, even though I did write the section, I'm not as prepared on the pre-application process tonight as I intended to be when we were talking about the conditional use permit process. So I'm pulling from memory, but my memory is that we have an element that allows, if the planner does not find it necessary, it allows the applicant to waive pre-application. So that really allows somebody, both the planner and the individual, to sort of agree, hey, we're just doing a small change to this permit. I filled out 16 applications. I'm a developer. I've been in here a lot. This is fine. I can submit it, and they both sort of agree. It doesn't change the review process at all. It just allows for that streamlined. Those pre-application processes can take a lot of time.
We have so much trouble with getting them to come in at all.
And that won't change if we need them in, or if they're submitting an application and it doesn't have, and it's submitted and it's incomplete and the planner can't process it, then they're not going to, I would presume in that case, waive the pre-application process. So the other thing is, though, we can think about removing that and require the pre-application process. That's where we sort of started with this, and that's.
Madam Mayor?
Okay.
Mr. Crafton.
Sorry, I just want to
wishes.
just because I'm looking at it right now, the way it actually reads is that it's required. So the change that would be in front of us if we were to accept this as is basically making it an option. So right now it's required. Going forward, we're saying, hey, now it's an option to have this meeting. All I'm saying is, if you choose not to, I think it'd be the right thing to do is make sure the applicant we have something in writing, so the applicant doesn't come back to us and say, well, I didn't know that I had that option. And it goes, well, here you go. Here's something in writing that said you chose not to have it. That way we're not delaying permits, or people are fighting us with it. I think that's just the best way to go about it.
And that's easy to do on the application forms. It's just have kind of a big checkbox, you know, but I think that you also have to have, under the conditional use permit section, under that application process, or the permitting section, I shouldn't say conditional use permit, under the permitting section, you also have to have consent from the planner.
Well, I agree with Mr. Crafton because they'll come in and say, well, I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me?
We will make sure that we put that, so for the record, we're gonna make sure we both update the downtown overlay pre-application process and also ensure that the application form itself has the express waiver of pre-application subject to planner consent language in bold. How about in bold? We'll put it in the bottom in a box.
Good. I've got a different rabbit hole to go down if you guys are content with what happened here. Well, I just don't want to change the subject if there's still a discussion.
No, you go ahead and change the subject. I think we're all right.
Okay, so I'm on the same page, if that makes it any easier. Page 126 of 178, once again, talking about the downtown overlay district. New item D, capital D, which used to be small letter E, talks about demolition. And it currently reads, design review is required if a building has historical significance. Request for demolition permit must be submitted to the city planner and accompanied by a plan for a replacement building. I would like to see that second part stricken, because what if there's a fire and a building is substantially destroyed? And there is no plan to replace it, but from an insurance standpoint, it makes sense to take that hazard down and get it out of the way. I don't think there should have to be a plan for a replacement building. I mean, if there is a plan, it would make sense, you know, to go through the pre-application process and all that and do that. But if, in some cases, some buildings just need to be removed because they are a hazard to the public. So any comments on that?
Well, I think that's a good idea. The one thing I would say is, because we're not changing a lot of these procedures substantively, what if I'm hesitant to remove one of the procedures from the downtown overlay district, although we can, but then what we could do is just add language that says accompanied by a plan for a replacement building or some sort of request for
If such a plan exists.
Yes.
The plan may be to take it down and leave a vacant lot, sell the lot.
I was wondering the same thing when I read this. I was looking for a spot where it talked about demolition just as a whole, because it looks like the way it reads in here is it basically says if you're, I'm going to tear down my business building because I don't want it anymore. You're basically, the way this reads is you're required to put another building back, is the way that I read this at least. So it's basically saying I'm required to maintain a building even if I don't want it. So that's where I or at least some type of language that says if it's an option. Hey, this is what the plan is to replace it, or my option is I'm not planning on putting anything here. You know, that should be allowed to be an option.
No, I think we can add language. I mean, I would say, as an attorney, if I was interpreting this on the other side, I would say my plan for a replacement is not to replace it. And I would feel like I was in full compliance with your code provision. That said, you know, a lot of people are going through this and navigating it without an attorney. So and this is not the best language, so I'll have to wordsmith a little bit. But if I add something like, so by a plan for a replacement building or explanation for non-replacement, and again, those words, you know, does that, I mean, that concept work, and we'll work on the language. Okay, for the record, that's on, and I'm using our clean draft. It's not to be facetious, I promise. It's just because that's the one we've used, so I want to make sure I'm being consistent. So for, on page 158 of the packet, subsection D in 1655.035, add the words or explanation for non-replacement in concept, wordsmithing necessary. Okay. So, I apologize I have to subject you all to that, but I think this is such a big project, it's so much more efficient if we're keeping those notes instead of recreating them later.
I have another question about Division 3.
Okay, ready.
Flip the page if you would to 128 if you're in the red line. 1655040 for you, Holly. A, commencement of work. Basically, to summarize my understanding of this is when your permit is issued to start building whatever it is you're doing, you have an entire year to start. And then when you explain all of these things, is it necessary to have that in there? Instead, we could just put a limit on when their permit expires as a whole. And in the next section, completion of work, it says it has, from the time of starting, you have to be done within 18 months. So we're essentially giving them 2.5 years to complete their building. I would think that during the permitting process, a conversation is going to be had saying it's going to take me X amount of months, X amount of years. I mean, depending on what you're building, it could take years to complete it, and that would be approved up front. It almost feels unnecessary to say you have a year or else we're going to revoke your permit. I would think that the second part, completion of work, is going to be the higher thing. If you say, hey, it's going to take me 3 years to build this hotel, if a hotel was being put in there as an example, you would get 3 years. Well, if you don't start pretty quickly, then you're not going to meet that 3-year deadline you've given yourself. So I'm just curious to see, again, I know you didn't want to change Division 3 too much here, but sorry, I have
No, I think, I mean,
just
again,
questions when I was reading it.
this is well within council's authority, so we can change the whole thing if we want to, so I, you know.
And my comment on that would be that I do agree if you give somebody a permit, there has to be some sort of explanation or expectation of work starting. So I agree with keeping the year, but I would think, you know, unless otherwise approved by the planning commission, might be appropriate. So if you tell the planning commission, you know, this is what I want to do, I don't think I'm going to be able to get all the steel in, whatever the case is, so I'm not going to be able to start for 18, 19 months or whatever. Planning commission say, okay, we'll start at 18 months, but I agree with you that the completion of work, well, it'll get done when it gets done. What are we going to do, revoke a permit on a building that's half built? I don't see that happening. But
My thought would be either one of these needs to go away or it needs to be combined into one thing to make it a little bit more fluid with like what Mr. Graham says. You have one or the other, you can't. It's just it was odd when you read it again. Again, trying to make sure a 10-year-old could read this is what it was?
Yes, and this is a lot of unnecessary language. So I think you're both sort of getting at that same point. 1 year, I agree that legally we often see these expiration or these time periods for mobilization and starting the work, because if the work doesn't start, the analysis of other permits and what works and is harmonious with the neighborhood and all of those criteria that we use or the planning commission uses to approve permits, it changes, and you have not started the work that, you know, so you get to this place where it starts to be distorted a little bit because a permit was maybe granted or approved 5 years before, they didn't start the work, all this change happened all around it, and now that use it's not as harmonious as it was, all the criteria would be different. So I think that's what Councilmember Graham, I think that's what you're sort of getting at, right? Keeping that 1 year.
right, keep the 1 year in there, but give the planning commission the authority to extend the start date on the permit. You know, I mean, as things go along and they say, well, we can't, you know, we're 9 months in, we're not going to be there, and so instead of restarting the whole process, just be able to give the planning commission the ability to say, okay, give you another 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, but if it gets to the point where all of a sudden now the neighborhood is changing or something like that, then they can say, no, if you didn't start, so we're rescinding the permit. So.
Okay, and that extension approval, we're going to rest that authority in the commission, right? Is that what you just said?
That
Okay.
would be my recommendation on it.
Councilmember Crafton,
I
how
would
do you
agree
feel
with
about
that.
it? Okay.
Again, I always like leaving things with the commission because the commission's a body made up by the people. And so again, you get multiple opinions like we've seen here tonight.
Okay, so on page 56, section 1655.040, we are going to create a single one-year expiration, one-year start of work provision, subject to commission extension, of the ability of the commission to extend. Do you want to, that can be one sentence, when the next sentence could be a completion of work component, or even allowing the commission authority to establish a completion of work. You know, that we can do either, but, or do you want to just keep it to the 1 year? This is, I see this being, if we're gonna rewrite it, it's gonna come back to, I would guess, 1 to 3 sentences.
My question would be for our acting planner, deputy administrator. Is that a conversation you've had with people as what the completion time frame would be? Because that would probably be, to me, the next sentence is a completion time frame needs to be established, whether in the application, pre-application meeting, there's somewhere in the process before the permit is issued, there needs to be, hey, this is how long it's gonna take us. And maybe it takes you 2 years, but then you say, hey, I need 2 years and 6 months, because, you know, give yourself a little bit of wiggle room type of thing. So that's what I would say, something along those lines.
Yes, we have had that conversation, especially with the supply chain and just the disruption that the contractors are experiencing, and the same with the workforce. And so we issue the permits for new development now for a 1-year expiration, checking in with them periodically to see if there's gonna see an anticipated change, because if we have to bring anything to the council, that's about 60 days for pre-planning for them. And then notifying all the people around in that area that they're gonna extend a timeline. So there is a staff investment. Just keep in mind when we put these dates on a permit, there is staff time to prepare to bring it back forward. But it's reasonable to say that there are delays in construction right now.
Holly?
Yes,
Sorry,
sorry.
I think if you could turn your mic on and off, I'm guessing there's feedback
Oh.
when the other mics go on. Anyway, sorry.
Turn it off and then on? Okay.
Speaking.
Oh, turn it off when I think. Okay, are there any other comments on Division 3? No? Okay. So we're gonna move into Division 4, where we will spend a very long time. So everybody get comfortable. Now I'm gonna, where's my clicker? There's a lot going on my table with all of these ordinances. Here we go. All right, I actually summarized all of these points, but they are memorialized in your PowerPoint. Mayor, do we have any of the council members on the phone? Okay, I just want to make sure I'm failing to give page numbers.
Elena, left
She had to leave.
earlier.
Okay. So, excuse me. So Division 4, Use and Development Regulations, includes all chapters that govern the uses in each district, except of course for the overlay, the downtown overlay district, including not only the specific criteria for specific uses identified in the proposed code, but density and dimensional requirements, parking, landscaping, and the sign code. The only section included in the division that was not substantially revised was the sign code. Council adopted the sign code in 2017. It is a very comprehensive chapter, and so I did not change the sign code except for, again, to make sure that we have a unified, uniform approach, but there's no substantive changes to the sign code. You may want to tackle the sign code in phase 2, but the code is compliant and does not pose any legality issues right now.
My question about the sign was, I remember Senator Wilson brought something up because in 2018, I believe it was the Alaska Supreme Court that had some comments around signs. I think specifically it pertained to political campaign signs. Were you able to look to see if there was any, I guess, conflicting information between the two of them yet? or would you be able to bring any of those comments back for phase 2 at that time?
I will definitely look at that a little more closely, but I will say I've looked at the sign code provisions in the past on this very issue. I do know the cases you're referring to. I believe one of them was that involved the Matsu Borough, and so your sign code is compliant. It doesn't have those issues. It may, on all sign codes, certainly may have a problem in the way they're applied, but that thankfully your team has not applied the code in any way that is questionable, and they generally check in with legal. So if that's helpful, I think the city is in good stead in that regard. So excluding the sign code, and again, I'm going to check in. If somebody wants to delve into that, we certainly can, but I have excluded that from, aside from sort of just those surface changes. Okay, I'm not hearing anything right at the moment, so for now we will, and I do think when you go into phase 2, because signs have implications of policy, right? I mean, do we want to allow a flashing sign? Do we want to allow a wall sign? And all of those questions are ones to be considered in phase 2. They certainly change the way community look, but so we'll preserve those those questions for that phase. So I'm just going to walk through these because we have so many different chapters to cover. It's good to know what's coming. So 1660 is zoning district uses. 1665 is density and dimensional requirements. Just a reminder, you have a separate red line for density and dimensional requirements. 1670, water, sewage, and drainage systems. We will delve into that very thoroughly, but not today. Ideally, we're going to do that when we have our Title 13 ordinance, so you can see how that works for all utilities across the board, what we're looking at. 1680, landscaping standards, and 1685, non-conforming lots, buildings, and uses. Okay. It's helpful to understand some of the changes that you see under Title 16 as it exists today. Zoning districts are addressed in one single chapter with sections describing the purpose of all the districts. So the district use chart is in that section, the planned unit development overlay district is in that section, and the downtown overlay district. Each of these sections is extremely long. One of the things that I noticed when trying to put on my member of the public hat is it's very easy to find yourself in the downtown overlay district, CUP district use chart for that district, and get very confused as to what applies. So that was one of the things that we really wanted to do, was clean it up so that it's very easy for a person to say, I'm a beekeeper, I have a junkyard, whatever it might be, and go to the specific use and be able to find a title that refers to that use, and for the administration to be able to look directly at only the law that governs that particular use. So that's the structural organization approach we took. And do any of the council members, do you have comments on that or concerns? Okay. All right. Moving on. I covered a lot in that little diatribe. So while the specific use criteria for themselves remains predominantly unchanged substantively, they have been restated sometimes where there was inconsistencies in the criteria that made it difficult to apply them. So we cleaned up substantive references to the use only where those uses were really hard to apply or they were inconsistent. When you go into phase 2, you will decide things like how many chickens do we want to allow? Do we want to allow catteries? What district do we want to allow a cattery right? All of those questions that lie squarely with council, with recommendations by the commission, you're going to have to answer those questions. Or not, you can keep it the way it is, but those certainly aren't questions for me to answer. All right, I don't know why, oh, here we go. Okay, so the first section that or chapter we're gonna look at is 1660 zoning district uses. So we're going to look at the district use chart, the unlisted uses, accessory uses, and I'm not going to read them all out, but I'm going to tell you to turn to page 7 of your PowerPoint, because sometimes it's really handy to have a blueprint. And so those are all of your sections. One of the most basic comments and important parts is, and you're all very aware, is we've revised the code to utilize only 2 types of permits: administrative permits and conditional permits. And those permit procedures are in Division 5. But we also revised the district use chart and the uses to remove accessory uses, home occupations, from that chart, and to deal with them separately and distinctly. The proposed section 166010, which is entitled Unlisted Uses, the purpose of this section is to afford the planner discretion to find an unlisted use similar to another use that has been permitted, allowed conditionally, or prohibited in the use chart, but subjects the planner's determination to confirmation by the commission at its next regular meeting. This approach stemmed from council's discussion at one of the segments whenever we were talking about this provision. So that was incorporated. Proposed Code 1660-15, accessory uses, presents a new and more direct approach to the regulation of accessory uses. It authorizes without a permit accessory uses that meet specific criteria identified in that section. It permits garden, utility, or storage sheds of a certain size in the side yard or rear yard setback if these sheds are removable and certain criteria are met. It allows for other accessory uses in certain circumstances if a conditional use permit is obtained. It also clearly identifies accessory uses as unlawful that do not comply with this section. So the purpose here was accessory uses were sort of getting, they were confusing, or are confusing, I guess I could say, and in that if it's listed as its own separate use, it was hard for, or it can be hard for people to understand how that applies to the primary use. So you have a primary use that's permitted, then the accessory use is only permitted in some districts and not others, or it's permitted conditionally. And what does that mean, and what is a building? And you end up with a lot of frustrated individuals who sometimes are being asked to go through a permitting process for a very small thing like a shed in their backyard. Other times they're not going through a thorough process for something that's significant and has an impact on the district. So this provision is to separate them out and give accessory uses their own life. But people can look and see, what do I want to do on my property? Oh, look, I am allowed to do this. I need a permit to do this. I need a conditional use permit to do this. Any questions on this? This is sort of a significant change, at least for those looking at what they can do with their property.
I do have a question. Under special standards, D, I'm on page 136 of 278. The way I'm reading this is in the RR, R1, and R2, you can have one freestanding utility garden or storage shed. So you can have a storage shed or a greenhouse, but you cannot have both?
Yeah, I think, well, hold
That's the
on,
way
let
I'm
me make
reading.
sure I'm grounding
Yep.
myself in the language. So you went to, here, you're in 1660-15, but you are in the red line, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Still in accessory uses, yes, I was just.
Let me interrupt the council a minute. I would like to excuse the staff. Cassie? Mr. Bell? Public Works? Chief? You're
Mayor.
free to go.
So one thing I will say, the Public Works Director did consult with us on this, and also when we talk
Okay.
about density, I mean, it's up to, I mean, I think that he provided a lot of great
Okay,
consultation.
I didn't
We
realize
don't
that,
need-
so Eric, you get to stay. She just
Sorry.
throwed you under the bus.
Yes, I did. But we can do it. I mean, he can, you know.
Crystal,
So
do you
yes,
need
I think
Cindy?
that was the intent
Was
of
that-
the language.
do you need
Was
Cindy?
not to have multiple.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna send some. She's gonna
Okay.
Because we have a planning commission meeting tomorrow.
Sorry, back to my question, Holly. So just to clarify, was that is that what I'm understanding, am I understanding correctly?
Within the side yard or rear yard setback, yes, and it has to be easily removable, not fastened to the ground or any other structure or post, and less than 125 square feet, has no side longer than 12 feet in length and a maximum height of 12 feet at the highest point of the shed. So there are a lot of restrictions for if you're looking to have a shed or stored or without a permit, right? So this is what you can do within the side yard or rear yard setback specifically. And let's see.
Was your question, Mr. Crafton, could I put up a non-permanent building in which to store my boat? Is that kind of where you were leading?
No, I was just curious because, I mean, I drive down my street and I know 3 or 4 people that have a storage shed and a greenhouse in their backyard. And the way I'm reading this is one of those is now no longer allowed. I mean, a boat's different because that's probably, I mean, depending on the size of the boat, it probably won't fit in here.
My kayak will fit just fine.
It's kayak, different story, but I'm just more so like, that's pretty surprising there because, I mean, I have a storage shed right now and I mean, I have an intention to put a greenhouse up here in the future and at this point here, it says I can't now. And
Yes.
so, I mean, unless the council thinks differently, I'm hearing some things differently. I feel like it should be like one of each, you know? I can understand seeing, you could have one greenhouse, one storage shed, or storage and utility shed kind of fall under the same category in my eyes, but I could see one of each before you start requiring it. I do kind of like the design standards so somebody doesn't go build a giant greenhouse in the backyard. So that's my thought on it, is I could see one of each at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys can.
Yeah,
do
if I could
whatever.
comment on that, I do think you should be able to have more than one outbuilding in your backyard, but I mean, here they're talking about specifically building in the setback. You know, if you want a greenhouse in the setback, then you can't have a shed in the setback, or conversely. Am I reading that correctly, Madam Attorney?
Yes, you can have an accessory can be, so here, let's just go back to this. So general standards, each accessory use or accessory structure shall meet the following standards. So if the accessory structure is detached, it shall not exceed, and then we have height requirements in the specific districts. In other zoning districts, detached accessory structures shall not exceed the height of the principal building to which it is accessory without first obtaining a conditional use permit. So we've allowed an option for allowing that, but only with a permit. Accessory uses and structures shall not be allowed on a lot before the principal use or structure is established on that lot, unless that's improved by conditional use permit. So one of the things we have done is we've added this conditional use permit to give some flexibility. And except as otherwise provided in this section, they must comply with all other provisions of the code, which includes the dimensional and setback requirements.
Eric?
Yeah, I shook my head, but I think Mr. Graham is correct. So I think what it's saying is if they're small and movable, they're not counted if they're in the setback. So so because it says right here, it says may be allowed within the side yard or rear yard setback. So we're talking setbacks on the rear and the sides. If it's easily removable, not fastened to the ground, or and is less than basically 12 by 12 and not too tall.
Yes.
So it's using that like zone that everyone's like, well, I'm just gonna push up against my fence. That's the setback, and it's using that if it's temporary and movable. So to Mr. Crafton's comment, if you are outside setback, if you're in your yard further, then I don't think it speaks to the limit on how many greenhouses you have. So if you have a big enough space and you want to line up more, this provision in code at least doesn't limit that.
And that's,
Except for those provisions I just read,
Yeah, and
are the ones that limit.
thank you for pointing it out,
Yeah.
Mr. Graham. Yeah, reading it again, I see setback, and I see what you're talking about. I think, Eric, you're right. So yeah, again, the initial reading of it sounded a little odd there. I was like, what? So no, I think it makes sense too, because you're basically saying, hey, yeah, you could put one up against the fence there, but you can have the one. You can't put 6 greenhouses along the fence in your setback area, type of thing.
But you will have the height restrictions and all those other restrictions from the first part, right? I mean, just make sure we're on.
That makes sense.
Okay,
I mean,
as long
again,
as
it
you're.
prevents somebody from putting a borderline commercial greenhouse in the backyard of their residential neighborhood.
And I do think, and Eric, you can talk to this, but one of the things we talked about when we talked about height and what those dimensions are, one of the things that Eric was looking at is what are the dimensions of a structure that would likely result in septic systems, water, that would house utility systems that then we need permits for, or we need a different process for. So that's where those dimensions came from, because those weren't there before. Do you have anything to add to that? I think that, okay.
And in the case of a beehive, would that be considered a structure, or what would that do? Because if you have one hive, chances are you'll have 4.
Well, and I think.
So are you considering that 4 structures, or how would that work here?
Well, structures are defined by a certain square footage, or, well, I guess a building is defined by a certain square footage. So the structure of the beehive is gonna be governed by beehives. I don't think that that it would, I mean, it's a good question, but I don't think it's going to trigger, unless they're larger than I think they are. I think you're gonna look at the beehives and what they can have, and that's going to govern. Yeah, so I think we wouldn't go to the, we would go to the accessory use, looking at the beehives. We look at if that's permitted as a primary use, and then we would look at the actual structure. So I don't know if I don't anticipate a beehive is going to reach these or exceed these heights. So it would be treated just like a building. And I'm trying to picture a beehive, which is one reason why you don't let lawyers write the substance, right? I'm like, what does that look like exactly? And so, but no, I think you're gonna be fine. All right, so we might as well finish looking at accessory uses together, because I do think this is something that probably everybody at the dais has, people have questions about. It's something that affects everyone, both commercially and residentially. So one of the provisions is that accessory uses and structures shall not be allowed on a lot before the principal use or structure is established on that lot, again, unless it's approved by a conditional use permit. And that's, I think, one of the provisions we see in a lot of codes. A lot of the comparable communities have this provision, and I think that is to keep the accessory use from being the primary use, but justified as an accessory use. But that might be something that policy-wise, council finds that's unnecessary, something to think about.
I have a question about accessory dwelling units. I was trying to find it in here. Do we have something that in here, Holly, before I start asking my question that you know of?
Well, I'm not sure if you're talking about home occupations, which are an accessory use that, that certainly has implications for dwelling units. But that's using obviously a dwelling unit as a home occupation. So otherwise they'd be treated like accessory uses. So if you're thinking about like a tiny house that somebody builds.
Mother-in-law unit is typically what I see a lot of. I mean, I know just dealing with a lot of real estate, Anchorage has a whole think one of their whole zoning areas in Anchorage says, hey, if you're R1, whatever, it allows ADUs, and specifically it's addressing, I mean, we chased it down one time, it was specifically addressing mother-in-law style units. I was looking in our district use chart too, and didn't even see it addressed at all.
Right, because, so the way we treated it was it's an accessory use, and so you
Okay.
would look at this and you'd say, oh, I'm actually going to exceed the dimensions that I can here, so I need a conditional use permit, which is in the language, and so they'd go through conditional use permit. So it's not outright permitted, but it's not prohibited, and the conditional use permit would require an analysis of the criteria that include harmonious to the neighborhood and all of those things, and is decided by the commission. Previously under your code, it was very difficult to, there were, I shouldn't say that. Currently under your code, that is not an easy thing to navigate in all of the districts. So this allows you to, a person can read this and say, I want to build a tiny house. Well, darn it, I wanted it to have a higher, I wanted it to be taller than this. And then they would come into a planner and they'd say, I want this, and the code says I can't have this without first obtaining a conditional use permit, at which point that would be confirmed, a packet would be handed to them, and that would be how they go about it. One of the things council can do is decide that, hey, you know what, we want to allow this in residential districts if it complies with certain parameters, and that's something we could do. And the way we would do that is we would add that to the accessory use section. So if there is a certain size, and it might be accessory structures that meet these dimensions that are used for this specific purpose, do not require a permit or require an administrative permit or whatever it might be, or permitted in the following districts. So there's room here if you want to add something like that.
I'd be curious what the rest of the council has to say about it. I would be interested in having the conversation about it. Specifically when it comes to saying, hey, I want to put an ADU in my R1 zoning area specifically for a mother-in-law. It's not, I'm building this so that I can run a business out of it. It's like, I'm building this because my elderly parents are coming to live with me now, and I want to give them a place to call their own on my property. I see that's something very common to do. But I'd be interested in seeing how other communities have handled the situation, because it's not uncommon for it to be seen, and I bet you there'd be some people who'd be surprised that they can't do it now, actually.
Well, and you can do it with a conditional use
Right,
permit.
I'm just saying it needs a
yeah.
permit, yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think that there are lots of communities, even large ones like Anchorage, moving away from regulation. So that's always an important thing to remember. We don't have to regulate anything, right? The city does not have to regulate anything. But I do think for the most part, because these types of units have utilities, and that means they will often have a toilet, and they will often have a shower, and they will have those provision, some type of permitting where the administration is aware of what they plan to use it for, and can look at that use and look at that burden on the city's resources and systems, is what this was designed to do, which would mean, so maybe they have a mother-in-law that doesn't have those systems, maybe that's a line to draw, but right now all this does is bring them into the door for a conditional use permit, but puts that in the hands of the commission. So I don't know so for purposes here, Councilmember Crafton, do you want me to just put a note in? So we have two things. I have a sort of a collection of comments where they were a little more substantive, and so we can bring them back so we can actually motion to amend on the floor. When we're working with the ordinance, I can bring alternate language that is sort of a, hey, if council wants to try to insert this, and then we can have that amendment, sort of have a list of amendments that council can amend or not amend the ordinance when we bring it back, and that'll give you another chance to discuss it. How do you want to approach approach this.
I'd like to at least have another opportunity if the rest of if another council member is like, yeah, it's something that's interests me too. I wouldn't want to remove the permitting process in its entirety. I'd probably say move it more in line with the administrative approval type of thing, where it's just saying, hey, this is what I'm doing, and we're making sure you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's, and you're not just throwing something up out of nowhere type of thing. But I'd be curious to see if somebody else says, hey, that's something I might be interested in having a conversation about.
And one thing I would just say before I make a note to do that, and I'll make sure I have that change. I'd like to check in with the administration, with both of you, just to see what your thoughts are on this. If you have any thoughts, do you have any concerns that?
From the planning perspective, Public Works and Planning have been working very closely because of this exact issue of building a secondary dwelling. And right now, our utility, some sections of the city, it's really put a strain on our, especially sewer and water. And so I think we just have to be mindful when we start talking about additional dwellings on these really small lots, the infrastructure it takes to support them. And if they don't require a permit, that's my perspective from what we've seen.
Yeah, I would mirror that. So we've got kind of two considerations on my part for infrastructure. So there's a section of town that we have water sewer services to to residents. We need to know if that use is going to change, because then that draws us into looking at the existing infrastructure and seeing if it's up to the requirements. And then there's a large section of town that is not served by any of that, and so they are going to be on their own well and septic, and there's offsets from all of those. And so we still care. We may not have an immediate connection to the ramifications of breaking those rules, but we still are sort of by DEC put out there as responsible party, if you will. They're expecting our code to lend in the compliance of their standards, and so a minimum parcel sizes will dictate, based on the geometry, how far away you are from your neighbor's well or their septic, and trying to limit those impacts that may be unplanned for. So I think as we go from like use of a property to development of a property, to have those reasonable requirements where they talk to us so we can head off expensive mistakes, we find that a valuable tool if we can keep it streamlined and not burdensome of the owner.
I would just add one other thing, and that is with good intention of having a mother-in-law apartment or having an accessory of some sort, then you start talking about parking. So we found this with home occupation. All of a sudden, there's 8 cars out in the driveway every day because all 6 bedrooms are being used. So this is kind of how this morphs. And so I think accessories need to be within a very confined definition that is realistic about what can potentially happen in certain parts of the city.
Okay, so to go down a different rabbit hole here, again, getting back to 1660, in this case 020, home occupation as an accessory use. Number one, I'm not sure home occupation is really the right term to use, because that kind of has a different meaning now from a legal standpoint of enforcement standpoint, as opposed to a zoning standpoint. So, occupation from the home or cottage industry or whatever the heck we want to call it might feel better. But when I look at 1660-020B, permitted uses, the last thing it says is home occupations are not permitted in the I, industrial, and P. districts. So if I'm running a gravel pit in an industrial area, this says that, you know, my son can't, or daughter, you know, can't raise raspberries and sell jam. I see that kind of being inconsistent with the whole idea of being an industrial district, which really gives you the most flexibility as opposed to the least flexibility. You've already got traffic there, you've already, you know, and for me to say, well, I can only sell gravel, you know, but by the way, to process my gravel, I've got this great conveyor belt system, maybe I could be the distributor for those as well. You know, that's not my primary use, but it is something where I can make money. I have issues with the home occupations not permitted in the industrial district.
I agree. I mean, I agree with your reasoning. I mean, but that's just what it was there, you know, but I agree that it was, there's a lot of uses prohibited in the industrial district that just surprised me, not for any, again, it's totally within the purview of council to decide how that falls, but I did look at some of the old ordinances and tried to piecemeal some of the legislative history and what the intent was, and I just couldn't find that. So I think it's completely appropriate to allow home occupations in the industrial district, unless there's something that I am missing on the administrative front. Is there? So we can make that change, and then council can, you know, see if that. And does anybody else on council have an objection to including industrial districts with the other districts for home occupation uses? So I'm not seeing any, so, you know, I'm just gonna add that. So in section 1660.020, change home occupation as an accessory use to include the industrial district.
I just want to ask.
I guess permissions.
Can I ask one question? So, do you think that's in there because of limits on homes in industrial?
Well, I mean, that's another.
That's the only reason I think it would come up. Is there a home in industrial to have a home occupation? So I don't see why you would limit it so much as home occupation. I'm just looking in our 3 industrial zones. We've got, of course, around the Menard and the airport, and then we've got the small one that's on Mystery Lane, and then there's around Centaur, and then there's our wastewater treatment plant. And so you don't have any homes that I'm aware of in an industrial zone, so that might be.
But if we ended up with one, and with a conditional use or a variant, right? If we end up with one, it's going to be limited.
Yeah, it would be.
Or if we put
it'd be a strange scenario. So.
Or a planned unit development, then we would also be restricted. So, I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that, Eric?
I have no qualms with the direction just given. I was just trying to figure out where the original code might have carved that out for whatever reason. So.
All right, so we made that change, and then that actually it was a perfect parlay into home occupation as an accessory use. So currently, home occupation is treated as a use, but in reality, home occupation is not a use, it's an accessory use because the primary use of a home is necessarily as a home, right? So as a residence. And so this makes it a little bit clearer how you look at quote unquote home occupation, and we will look at see what other terms are out there. Home occupation is used in a lot of the communities that have this, but there are some others. So we'll bring back some options. Because changing a term to help with clarity is definitely, you know, sort of an easy thing for us to do and for council to weigh and decide if you want to do that or not. So we'll do that. But this is a reflection of what's in your code for the most part. But we did try to clean up the language and make it much clearer as to what is permitted and what is not permitted. The other thing that we did is we changed the prohibited uses. It wasn't necessarily to change what was prohibited, it was to expressly state what was prohibited because there seemed to be some confusion. The other thing that we have here is a specific reference to short-term rentals. And all we do really is refer them to the short-term rental specific use criteria section. We just wanted to clear up because one of the things that was happening under the current code, people wonder, am I a home occupation? Am I a short-term rental? Where's the line? How does that work? Do I have to apply it to both?
Madam Attorney, where did the list of prohibited uses come from?
So some of those are in your code, but others were added based on uses that were causing complaints or problems or were otherwise prohibited somewhere else in the code but weren't clear and we weren't sure. So you can do whatever you want with that list. Basically, like the sale or rental of pornographic materials was on. So one of the things that we did look to was Soldotna for some guidance, but I mean, whether or not you want to include some of these things, it's really up to council. I don't see, there's no legal reason to keep or remove any of them. Administration might have some other thoughts based on the impact of some of these uses on property. But remember too, we're talking about a home occupation, so that doesn't mean that any of these things are necessarily prohibited or permitted as a primary use. It's what can be done as a home occupation in those districts. Madam Mayor.
Holly, this is the anal retentive part of me. Under prohibited uses, C for number 3, can we fix the spelling on automotive sales, please?
Yes, of course.
Those little things just jump out at me,
No,
I'm sorry.
those things are very important.
Thank
you. Yes.
Also in prohibited uses, this is under D, 1620.020D, number 2, it says no more than one nameplate or one wall sign is displayed, and that sign does not exceed 2 square feet in area. So that's 1 foot by 2 foot. We have a lot of home uses, home occupations now that have businesses in them with signs larger than that. And several of them are fairly recent. And the reason for that is, I mean, you're 40 feet back from the street. A sign that's 2 square feet is just not readable. I mean, Kathy, do you know what size those campaign signs were that you ordered? Those are like 1.5 by 3 or something. I think 2 square feet is too small to be useful, and if you can't tell people to come here for your educational building blocks or whatever that sign is over by your home, Madam Mayor, then that's not a home occupation anymore.
I know, as an example, to answer the yard sign thing, my campaign yard signs were 18 by 24s. Granted, those are at the end of the, very close to the road, but that gives you an idea that if you were to stick that in the window of my house, you basically can't read that, and I'm on a half-acre lot too. Like, it's hard to see that from the street.
Yes, we can definitely make the signs bigger. And whatever council wants to do, I mean, one of the things we can do is, I think this is based on dimensions that were in either, I think they're in comparable communities or in elsewhere in your code, so I have to check. But one of the things I can do is just bring you hey, here are these other sign limitations, or you have a healthy comprehensive sign code. You could let them have whatever signs they want. It's also acceptable. So whatever council wants to do here. Do you want me to bring, here, I'll put it this way. Do you want me to bring you back some options so you can look at those dimensions when you're going through the code in ordinance form? Or do you want me to just remove it and you won't have a sign requirement for home occupation?
Madam Attorney, before we do that, just to give you some real life examples, the intent of home occupation is not to bring customers to your business. So the intent is to minimize traffic impact and to minimize noise and to minimize conducting business that you would otherwise do in a commercial building. So the bigger the sign, more traffic, more noise, it's kind of going to a different intent. But correct me if I'm wrong, like a realtor, work out of their house, but they probably don't have clients meet them there to go show property.
We can't even put a sign, there's an Alaska
Exactly.
statute that says you can't even advertise that you have my thought would be that it's the difficulty of seeing it from the road. So I could see maybe going up to a 2x2, 2 foot by 2 foot sign, just make it easier to see from, oh, okay, well, I'm going to Stu's home counseling business, you know, and whenever I see, I can see the sign a little bit easier. Not that we'd ever have that or want that, but bad example apparently. But you could see it from the road easier, I think, is probably where Mr. Graham's more so getting along the lines of it is. I could see it'd be hard to read.
And one of the things to note too is that this is just when you can have a home occupation without getting an administrative permit. So if you want to have a bigger sign, you can, go get a permit for a home occupation permit to have a bigger sign.
Can I ask a follow-up? So, as you kind of, this is to Holly, so as you massage the structure, would it be better to have this sign reference come out and let home occupation signs be talked about in the sign section? Does that clean up changes? Like if the council wants to have a sign day and have pieces of wood that are painted and say, this is this big, and then decide what signs, is that something that would be useful for structure? Or is that kind of what you envision, Holly, or?
I think if we're going to have a specific sign requirement, and there are the sign requirements that would apply to it, but if we're gonna have a specific sign requirement, I feel like we at least need to refer back to it if it's in the sign code. I mean, only because we want people to be able to go and say, I'm having a home occupation, and then they're in, and they're following those words, and they're plugging them in, control find into your code, home occupation, and everything that they need to do is within. I mean, that was sort of, sort of the goal.
I'm just curious.
But I do think it certainly, I don't have a problem with that. I think that actually would be very clear if it's like follow the sign code and then we add a home occupation provision. But I think the biggest question is, if we said no bigger than 5 square feet, would that solve the problem? Do you want to have some limitation? Because this is saying is you don't even have to get an administrative permit, which is a big step. We don't want to know, we're fine, you do you, so long as you're complying with this laundry list of limitations sort of on your use. And one of them is the sign limitation. I don't know if that changes. In many ways, this is a much more permissive provision. The only thing is there are specific uses that are called out and specified in the prohibitions, but it's very permissive in that there's no permit. You just use your house. And I think one of the reasons why we talked about that was the shift to remote work, and people really using their homes on a much more regular basis and in a way that's harder to track. And so in light of the let's regulate less approach, it seemed like having very specific uses that we don't want to see in those residential districts or in those homes, but then providing some clear guidelines and then letting people kind of do their thing was the approach.
If you don't have some kind of regulation on a sign for these home occupations, you'll drive down the road and there'll be a 4x8 sheet of plywood.
Or a wall sign, for example, doesn't require a permit in Wasilla, so you can have a beautiful or not so beautiful wall sign on the side of someone's house. So I don't know. What do you guys want to do? So our choices are, I can bring back some options that have dimensions that align with comparable communities. We can specifically say in here, which might be easier, signs larger than X square feet require a permit or something, just to make it clear, because this is telling what they can do without an administrative permit. We can very specifically reference what signs trigger the need for a permit. But I would turn to the administration and to council on, how big of a sign. I will tell you, I did not come up with 2 square feet. Like all of those numbers always come out of comparable market codes, comparable communities, or your own code, because I'm not very spatially gifted. So, I mean,
I think
I don't know how big of a sign
one of
is.
the things I might do is I'm gonna go test sign sizes and see how
Yeah.
far away I can read it from the road. Cause that's gonna give me, like, obviously I don't want a massive signs. I don't want, like the mayor says, I don't want 4x8 sheet, like.
We have some examples for you.
I mean, that would work, but I think the 1x2 or the 2 square feet, is that what it is here we're talking about, is a little too small. So I'm not saying it needs to be 3 times the size, but a little bit larger is definitely what's necessary. Deputy Administrator, if you have some examples, I mean, I'd like to test it, tape it to the side of my house and see how far away I can see it, because that's really what you're thinking about here is when you're going to somebody's home business, home occupation, how far away do you have to be able to see the sign to make sure granted, we got addresses and everything like that, but it's one of those little things that help identify it just a little bit easier here.
I think that's great. I think the more deliberate your words can be in the code, the better. So we can bring you some examples, maybe when we bring. Are you okay with this part of the conversation happening at the ordinance stage? Like if we're, so we will bring, when we're looking at this, when you're looking at the ordinance, we will make sure you have some photos. Okay, some photos and some language from comparable communities. Okay.
Holly, are you at a stopping point?
Almost, I think. Well, let me just see that there is no other criteria in home occupations, and then that is a stopping point because we will be delving into the specific use criterias. Each of those sections have been separated out, so that's like beehives, adult business, etc.
Okay.
So we can stop if that works for council, but I do want to see if you guys have any comments on those other requirements that allow for a home occupation without an administrative permit. So some of those things are sales and services are scheduled by appointment only so that no more than 1 patron vehicle is on the premises at a time and traffic is not generated by the home occupation and greater volumes than would normally be expected in a residential neighborhood. There's no significant change in the outside appearance of the building or premises or other visible evidence of the conduct of such home occupation other than 1 sign that complies with this section. Equipment or process is not used in the home occupation which creates noise, vibration, glare, fumes, odors, or electrical interference detectable to the normal senses off the lot if the occupation is conducted in a single-family residence or outside the dwelling unit if conducted in other than a single-family residence. So there's a lot of language regarding sort of just keeping the home occupation from impacting the neighborhood. Only 1 home occupation is permitted per lot without obtaining a conditional use permit, approving both home occupations, and no exterior operations including display of merchandise and storage of goods, materials, or equipment. So we do have some pretty, there are significant restrictions on when we're gonna just allow that to occur without a permit.
I think I like what you're saying. My question is about home occupations. Do we have a limit on how small the lot could be before we say, no, you can't have a home occupation at all?
I do not think we put a lot size. I mean, a home, it can only be on, right? So we have the,
I think it's 10,000 square feet before it takes to have a single family home is 10,000 square feet.
so that would be, I mean, your limit would be whatever your residential use limit is.
That brings up an interesting point, 16.020.020D3 says the use of the dwelling, for home occupation can't B, for more than 30% of the combined floor area of the dwelling, and it says and appurtenance, so theoretically you could build another garage out front and do your CPA business or whatever from there, but yeah, I think that kind of plays into that, and this is all new wording, D3, according to the red line
It
here.
is.
Kind of be interested to see where that came from when we have that discussion.
Okay, so one of the things I can do too for home occupation is bring the language, the comparable community language, where we're pulling from. This really was an amalgam of, I think, 2 separate communities. So, pulling them together, removing some of the requirements, and then working with administration to recognize sort of where we were actually seeing. This was actually, these issues were coming up and people were struggling to understand them. So I'll make sure we can present that all to you. The other thing is if council members would consider sort of 30%, regardless of the other communities, when we're getting these numbers, they're all flexible numbers. So as Councilmember Crafton said, he's gonna kind of eye the signs. This is a great area for you to kind of do some homework in the sense that as you're driving around the community, think of these criteria and these numbers and the home occupation, please. I think it'll help council weigh in when we bring those other resources to you for the section.
Just to tag along to that as well, part of the reason why I think about it is I look at Anchorage and how small their driveways are getting. And so I know we're densifying, we're getting to smaller and smaller lots, we're running out of good usable land. And so that would be my fear is, 30% is how much you can modify the house. That doesn't take into account how much driveway space you have, which is something that's already kind of being addressed in here. But again, I would be curious to say, hey, if your lot is smaller than X amount of space here, you're not going to be able to have a home occupation because you just don't have the driveway space, or you're going to start impeding traffic at that point by parking on the roads.
And one more thing just to add to the conversation, I would like to add a section. One thing I realized, we talk about what's permitted without an administrative permit, but I would like to expressly state that that a home occupation may, that does not comply with these may be permitted via conditional use. But I don't need to add that, but I'm wondering if council would like that, because I think that was the intent when I drafted it, but I think it could be clearer. So I don't know how you feel about that. I would like to get council's thoughts.
I would think making it easier for people to read. And I think if that's in there and somebody reads it, then they're gonna go, oh, wait, am I allowed to do this? And they're gonna call us and say, hey, this is what my intention is. And it's gonna allow us to have that conversation with them and say, hey, yeah, it doesn't actually look like you meet the needs. We're gonna have to do a CUP on that.
Madam Mayor, I move we exit committee of the whole.
Is there a second?
There's a second.
It's been made by Councilmember Graham, seconded by Councilmember Crafton to exit committee of the whole. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, the time is 8:48. We are now at communications. Madam Clerk, please read the title of the minutes.
Thank you. Planning Commission minutes, August 13th, 2024. Airport Advisory Commission meeting minutes, August 15, 2024.
Thank you. We are now at audience comments, which is a time for members of the public to share their views with the council. This is not a question and answer period or a time for dialogue. Speakers may be referred to administration, or issues raised may be taken under advisement by the council or administration. Additionally, over the last year, the City of Wasilla has routinely had members of the public attend and read excerpts from novels, some of which involve sexual content and/or description of incest or domestic violence that are not intended for children under the age of 14 or may be triggering to listeners and viewers based upon their past experiences. For those of you with young children viewing or listening to this meeting, or who may be triggered by the description of incest or domestic violence, please be aware we are now entering public comment, and you may want to mute the video or temporarily exit the meeting. We will notify the public when the public comment has ended, and council is moving on to the next item on the agenda. For those of you participating in public comment tonight, I respectfully ask to remember that our attendees, viewers, and listeners may be under the age of 14 or victims of domestic violence and are not choosing to read the passages that you are choosing to read to them. Audience comments are now open. Please begin your testimony by stating your first, last name, and if you live in the city, and you're limited to 3 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Jackie Goforth. I live in Matsu. I'd like to speak a little bit about the school district lawsuit, decision that was rendered. I want you to know, and I've gone through 2 attorneys now to make sure my information is not inaccurate. Nothing was decided on whether books are obscene or not. Nothing. What happened was the school district removed 56 books from the shelf and put them into the queue to be looked at and evaluated, but they only got to 39 of them. Of those 39, 7 of them were unanimously chosen or unanimously decided as being obscene and should be removed. About 15, I believe, were decided by a majority vote that they were okay and were not obscene and should go back to the school, and they did at the time. And about 15 of them went back to the superintendent's office for him to make a decision on what should be done with the ones that were majority rule obscene and should be removed. The decision that was made by the judge was those books shouldn't have been removed and not evaluated. So the books that had not gone back to the school yet were ordered to go back to the school, and that was the 17 or so they hadn't got to. In the first week of June, the superintendent, Tranny, and his department sent every single book that had gone to him to be looked at back out to the school. I don't know if they looked at what the decision was because Identical's vote was 8 people there. Now, the creation of the board had 6 conservatives on it and 5 school district or liberals. And the majority vote at the beginning of the sessions that they had, starting in September, October, were always 6-5. They were usually 6-5, unless they voted that it wasn't obscene. I'm serious. And starting about in January, the vote started changing. And by February, when Identical was decided, there were 8 people there. There was 1 conservative and 2 school district people missing. And the vote was 6, it was illegal and needed to be removed, and 2, it was fine and you could go back to high school only. And one of those was a school district teacher who had changed her vote or had decided that this was illegal and should not go back to the schools. So to sit there and say that these things were sent right back out because they're not obscene does not look at the actual things that happened. And what is really happening is parents are getting to hear what is being handed to their children to read or what their children have just looked out and picked up on the shelf to read, and they didn't know what the children are reading. It's without their knowledge or consent. Identical, which is a very obscene book, according to the 2 LCACs now, was given to children to read, and the parents didn't know, and that's why I keep coming here. Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
I know it's been a long night. I'll try to keep it brief. My name is KJ Martin Albright. I live in the Connecticut RSA outside of city limits, but I do all my shopping here. Another person said this more eloquently than I could, so I am going to quote him. It was Barack Obama. True freedom gives each of us the right to make decisions about our own life, how we worship, what our family looks like, how many kids we have, who we marry. Freedom requires us to recognize that other people have the freedom to make choices that are different than ours. A small vocal group of people relentlessly pushing their views on everyone, that's not freedom. A small vocal group of people throwing a tantrum because they didn't get the outcome they wanted through long-established policies and procedures, that's not freedom. A small vocal group of people getting new committees formed, growing government, bureaucracy, and paying for it with your tax dollars and mine, that's not freedom. Implying that even after I've had to give permission for my kid to get a library card, and after I accompany my child to the library and speak with him about the books he borrows, the government is a more appropriate parent than I am, that's crazy. I believe in the freedom to read. It is fundamental to public libraries, which are the cornerstone of democracy. Free and equitable access to accurate information which examines all sides of an issue, and not just one point of view, is necessary for democracy to thrive. Public libraries are for everyone, all members of the public, no matter how someone worships, who someone loves, what their family looks like, or how a person sees themselves, or what their politics are. The seemingly never-ending assault on libraries and librarians is not about community standards, but the standards of a few who act as if it is their right to impose their beliefs on everyone else. That is fascism, not freedom. Thank you and have a good night.
Begin your testimony by stating your first, last name, and where you live, and you got 3 minutes.
My name is Jeannie Trushinsky. I live outside in the greater Wasilla area. I am a longtime Wasilla and Wasilla Library supporter. On October 7th, the Friends will be restart their book club. Our first book that we're going to read this year is Remarkably Bright Creatures, which is just an absolutely beautiful story. Everyone is always welcome, and the Friends bought copies of the books Books for Book Club so that they are accessible to be checked out for people. We have our super sale on October 13th, 14th, and 16th. It's a 3-day sale. I have these for Jamie for you so it tells you the times. We really rely heavily on the book sales to support the programs that we do at the library. Last fiscal year, 2023, we had 105,000 people through the library doors. We have a door counter. And these people that continue to come to these meetings and complain about the library are not those people. Those people are not complaining about the library. And remember, Graham, when you said we have a lot of problems at the Wasilla Library? I may not sound like it, but I am respectfully disagreeing with your inaccurate opinion. We have one problem at the Wasilla Library. This group of people who hates us, who hates libraries, who hates education, who hates people that are different than them, and it is a crime. And it is going to be a huge problem if you as a city decide to follow any of these procedures that these other two groups have followed. They're out of line. There's already 2 lawsuits. We only keep talking about the one for the school district, but the other one is actually about the procedure of how that group was set up, the LCAC for the school district. And Ms. Goforth can come and present all her little sides and leave out lots of information, like a book she brought here to complain about that the Friends of the Library purchased. We didn't actually purchase the book. We gave the city library $200 along with the Matsu Moms for Social Justice, which has now changed the name of that group, by the way, and that's a whole nother thing that she sits up here and rambles about, doesn't know what she's talking about. And the library staff, following the collection policy development, chose the books. The books she's complaining about, they're sitting up here. I'm sorry I couldn't be at the meetings, but I have a life occasionally. She's saying, acting like 3- and 4-year-olds are reading this book. 3- and 4-year-olds cannot read. Hello, their parents are reading that book to them if they are choosing to do that. Parents have a right to choose. That book, purchased in March of 2021, has been circulated 6 times. And clearly, one time was to them because they had the book at the last meeting. I know it's annoying when they're so rude, but think about what they're saying. Little of it makes sense.
Okay. Is there anyone else? Seeing no one, I'll bring you back to the dais. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just announcement, review board will be here on the 29th, 1 o'clock to test the tabulators that'll be used in the election. City election update, early voting here at City Hall Council Chambers, September 16th through 30th, weekdays 9 to 5 and Saturdays 10 to 3. So come on out and vote. If you want to vote by mail, the application deadline is September 24th, 5 p.m. Alaska time. And we'll see you here September 9th for our next regular meeting. Thank you.
Madam Attorney.
No comment.
Councilmember Crafton.
Thank you, Mayor. First, just want to say thank you, Holly, for always a fun and informative meeting when it comes to Title 16. I think we're crossing the halfway point here because Division 4 is the longest, so I would say that's almost half right there, just with that one alone, as well as thank you, Council, for just a really good meeting. I did have one question for our attorney, something I had brought up to our clerk. Somebody had brought to my attention that the Alaska state flag is not to be flown alone. I thought that was really interesting, and with a quick Google search, I found there's an Alaska state statute that says that the Alaska state flag is supposed to have a United States flag next to it, or nearby. It doesn't really say. But the flag in question was the one on top of the train depot. And so I know I believe we leased the building out to the chamber, and so I'm not sure whose authority it is, or if we can encourage them to do it, and put one up there, or if it's needed. I was curious if our attorney had any comment on it, but one way or another, I would say as well, the flag looked a little tattered as well. So if it was in need of replacement, that would also be great. So again, curious who's falls in line. I'm not sure, Mayor.
That's not our flag.
Okay.
So you go talk to the chamber.
Okay.
Councilmember Cottle.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Holly. I know this is so much work and we add to your work, but I thank you for your patience with all of us. I did want to mention that I attended the Alaska Municipal League Summer Conference in Kodiak. Really glad I went, very informative. A lot of learning, a lot of networking, which is really good for all of us. And then I also wanted to mention that I was really honored to be able to pull all the winning tickets for the Bikes for Bert for the summer reading program at the library. Got to be in on the phone calls to the people that won and to hear how excited some of these kids were that they had won a bicycle, and just looking at all the jars of the tickets and realizing how many people had really participated in the summer reading program. Bert was a voracious reader, and he'd be really proud of this. And that's it.
Okay, Councilmember Velock.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I do want to thank everyone for coming, and I appreciate the different views. It helps us, just do our research and come to our conclusions. Thank you, Holly, for all your hard work. I think we are getting there. It's so nice to get out of definitions this meeting. So, and I also did attend the conference in Kodiak. It was very informative, and it was nice to hear Lisa Murkowski mention our runway. So I think that's going well. And that's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you to the staff and to others for being here and providing your input. Kind of as an incidental thing, Holly, I saw your name on the list of people being considered for Alaska Supreme Court, so congratulations on that consideration. I don't know how that process works, but I certainly wish you well and hope that your consideration is full on that, so that's great. So in Mr. Crafton, you commented about the flag on top of the train depot there. That is, the flag does belong and is the responsibility of the Chamber of Commerce. Senator Wilson and I work together to make sure that they are provided with flags to replace tattered flags. However, they can't replace it. They have to, usually MEA will donate one of the linemen's availability at some point. They'll say, hey, we need a new flag put up, and one of the linemen that's got a bucket truck that can get up there will do that. But sometimes it takes, a month or two to be able to break somebody away to do that. But I'll make sure that they're aware of that and that they have a suitable flag for replacement. So thank you for bringing that up. I don't know about the state code for flying the flag alone, so we'll do some investigation into that and figure it out. But it used to be that the American flag and the state flag were flown on top of that building, but due to the cost of consistently having to replace the flag about every 2 months, I think at some point the decision was made. But I'll ask them to look into that. Thank you for bringing that up. Somebody today was talking about some senior programming at the library. I just hope that's brought up in consideration of WASI. If it's something WASI can do, and we can spend library efforts and funds elsewhere, that's great. Or if WASI just needs a little bit of help, but I mean that's where seniors are used to be going for senior programming. So something worth looking at there. And then I noticed we've done a lot of swapping around with mics and things today. I don't know if we need to, if there's something wrong, or if we're just using them wrong, or if there's a piece of software that's missing or something like that. But I know when I was at AML trying to listen in on the meeting, the same thing was happening. You guys were cutting in and out, and it was very, very challenging to figure things out. But really destroyed my gin and tonic. So. But other than that, thank you all for being here. Eric, I did ask you earlier about the Lake Lucille, the construction happening over there. Do you have a minute to talk on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of exciting things happening at Lake Lucille Campground and Park. So this last winter, we started a project to rebuild the dock. So if you haven't been on the dock this year, you should go check it out. It's longer, it's safer, there's a better access path down there, which then leads you to an improved parking lot there to get to the water. So I guess you could say that there had been some pent-up design creativity that Parks has been working on. So they improved the size of the parking area to get down to the lake. They have been working in what we considered the tent camping area to remove trees that had, the whole thing had just overgrown. And so they're refreshing that with a plan to regrade it and get some grass growing in there and really just make it a lot nicer place to be. We had to take down one of the playgrounds within the heart of the campground because it wasn't safe anymore. So they've kind of dismantled that and made a fresh canvas, if you will, as we move forward with the plan. We don't have that figured out yet. And then the other side, kind of the day use area where the soccer field is, that parking lot has been expanded. That was really hard to maintain in the winter time and late spring. So some new improvements have been happening there. And then at the very back behind the soccer field, there is a new bow range and new graded area for the larger events. So we rent that out to groups that camp out there, like the Boy Scouts and like the live action role playing groups. And so there's a lot of really neat expansion. I think a lot of that is kind of pushing back on the growth that's happened. The trees that just sprout up and take over, we've kind of pushed that back so there's more access. And then the last thing I'll mention tree-wise, it kind of got exciting on Facebook this weekend about the trees on Cruzy. That was mentioned in public comment earlier. So those needed to be removed because of MEA saying they're too tall, they're encroaching on the power lines. And that's the second time they've been removed because the original trees were cut down and those were all suckers that grew back up, which is why it became even worse visibility issue because they weren't trees that were limbed up, they were just suckers that were taller. So it's unfortunate that trees like that need to be removed, but they were causing safety issues with the power lines and sight vision. And since they were planted 10 years ago or longer, they were identified as invasive species. So we'll find a replacement in the spring that will better match with their location and try to get some planting back in there that makes sense for the long term.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
The flag on top of the depot was put there January the 4th during a blizzard, snowstorm, and whatever. I didn't know until, I don't know, I can't remember who brought it up to us that the U.S. flag should also be there. Eric and I have talked about, because since we are over there redoing stuff or improving stuff now, is putting up flagpoles to where they can be easily accessible instead of having to get MEA or whoever over there, so.
To be able to fly them at half staff.
Yeah.
And that's impossible.
Right, we can't fly at half-staff, any of that, so it's just, makes sense to have flagpoles. I also went to AML, to Kodiak, and I got to go out to the rocket launching site. And, you know, we got to go into where the instrument, the panelists, they said, don't touch anything. And I'm like, okay, I won't. Because, you know, I like to press them buttons, see what'll happen. And so it was very interesting. I'd never been to Kodiak, and it was very interesting to see. But like Nikki said, Senator Murkowski, she kind of called me out. So that's okay, because we brought money home. As long as we're bringing money home, she can call me out all she wants to. Don't care. But we are, she gave us $3.3 million for the airport. And so as long as we're bringing money home, we're good. Because the more money we bring home, the less comes out of your pocket. Holly, thank you. We will get through this eventually. And if there's nothing else to come before this dais, we are adjourned at 9:10 p.m.